Earlier today, you made a choice that felt simple. Maybe you reached for a snack, replied to a message, or changed your mind about something small. You did not pause to wonder why. The explanation, if it came at all, was quiet and obvious, barely worth noticing. But that explanation may have been invented after the choice was already made. That is the part that should bother you. Because if your reasons arrive late, then the voice in your head is not always the author of your life. Sometimes it is the press secretary. It steps up after the fact, looks at what you have already done, and calmly tells a story that makes it all feel deliberate, sensible, and yours. In this video, you are going to hear the reasons that story falls apart. Some are subtle, some are funny, some are deeply unsettling, and by the end, the question will not be why people do irrational things. It will be how often you were certain you understood yourself when you were really just hearing the explanation your mind wrote for the record. Let us begin. The face you never chose. Petter Johansson sits across the table in Stockholm, 2 photographs in hand, and asks you a question that feels almost embarrassingly simple. Which of these faces do you prefer? You point. Maybe you hesitate. But you choose. He nods, slides the photo across, and asks you to explain your decision. You look down at the face in your hand and begin to talk about the smile, the eyes, the warmth, the way something about her just feels right. You do not know it yet, but you are about to become the punchline of your own story. Because here is the trick. In 2005 at Lund University, Johansson and his team were not just running a survey, they were running a magic show. With a flick of the wrist, they sometimes swapped the photo you picked for the one you rejected. You never saw the switch. You just accepted the new face as your own choice and started explaining why you liked it. And here is where it gets weird. Most people did not notice. More than 70% of participants failed to catch the swap. They looked straight at the face they had not chosen and, without missing a beat, gave detailed, confident reasons for their supposed preference. The smile seemed more genuine. The eyes looked kinder. There was a warmth, a spark, a sense of humor in the expression. All of it delivered with the kind of certainty you would expect from someone describing their favorite song or the taste of their mother's cooking. The experimenters did not stop at faces. They repeated the trick with card games, using classic magician's sleight of hand to make the manipulation invisible. The effect held. People signed for the package, then described its contents as if they had opened it themselves. You might be laughing right now. You should be. There is something almost charming about the mind's eagerness to explain, to fill in the blanks, to make sense of whatever lands in its lap. But the laugh lands on top of something dangerous, because if you can give a confident, specific reason for a choice you never actually made, what exactly is your explanation attached to? Is it a window into your true preferences? Or is it just a story that arrives on cue, ready to defend whatever happens to be in your hand? It is like signing for a package you never opened, then telling the delivery driver all about the contents. You do not pause. You do not check. The story is already there, waiting for the facts to catch up. And if you think that only works with strangers in a lab, wait until the brain starts defending a choice as trivial as a pair of stockings. The stocking table lie. You are standing in a department store in 1977, watching shoppers run their hands over 4 pairs of nylon stockings. The stockings are laid out in a neat row, left to right. They are identical, not just similar identical. Same brand, same weave, same color, same everything. But the shoppers do not know that. They are here to pick the best one. Almost everyone picks the pair on the far right. Not a small majority. A landslide. The rightmost stocking is the crowd favorite, again and again. Richard Nisbett and Timothy Wilson, the psychologists running this experiment, are not surprised. They have seen this before. It is called the position effect. When people choose from a row, they tend to favor the item on the right. But here's where it gets weird. After making their choice, the shoppers are asked why. Why did you pick this one? The answers come fast and confident. This one is softer. The weave is tighter. The color is just a little brighter. They talk about texture, quality, even subtle differences in shade. But there are no differences. The stockings are clones. The only thing separating them is their position on the table. Nisbet and Wilson press a little. Could the position have influenced your choice? The shoppers shake their heads. No, it was definitely the quality. The feel, the look, anything but the position. The idea that their decision could have been nudged by something as trivial as where the stocking sat on the table is brushed aside, almost offended. They are certain. They are wrong. This is not a trick that only works on other people. The shoppers are not confused or distracted. They are not lying. They are doing what every mind does when it cannot access the real cause of a choice. It does not freeze. It does not confess ignorance. It generates a cleaner, more flattering cause on the spot. The mind hates a blank space, so it fills it with the nearest plausible story. Think about the last time you read a restaurant review after already deciding where to eat. The review did not shape your choice. Your choice shaped how you read the review. You found reasons that matched what you already wanted. The explanation arrived after the decision, but it felt like it had been there all along. In the stocking study, the invented reasons were not just random. They were detailed, specific, and delivered with total conviction. The shoppers described differences in softness, weave, and color that did not exist. They denied the possibility of a position effect, even as their choices stacked up in a perfect right-side bias. The story was not just wrong, it was impossible. This experiment became a flagship example in the paper, telling more than we can know. The title is not a warning, it is a diagnosis. When the real cause is hidden, the mind does not go silent. It tells more than it can possibly know, and it does so with a straight face. The danger is not that you are easily fooled by clever psychologists in a lab. The danger is that your explanations may begin exactly where your attention ended. The story you tell about why you chose, why you wanted, why you acted, may be a cover story written after the fact, with no access to the machinery underneath. But a swapped face and a row of stockings are still someone else's trick. The more unsettling question is what happens when your own mind runs the trick on itself. When explaining makes you worse at choosing. You are standing in a psychology lab in Virginia in 1991, holding a spoonful of strawberry jam. You think you are about to reveal something honest about your taste. Timothy Wilson and Jonathan Schooler are watching. They do not want to know which jam you like best. They want to know what happens to your judgment the moment you try to explain it. Here is the setup. 5 jams, 5 spoons, a table of students. Some are told to taste and rank, no questions asked. Others are told to write down why they like or dislike each jam before ranking. The jams themselves are not a mystery. Consumer Reports has already ranked them from best to worst. The only question is how closely the students' preferences will match the experts. The result is not a gentle nudge. It is a trapdoor. The students who just tasted and ranked the jams produced results that lined up almost perfectly with the expert panel. But the students who had to explain their choices, their rankings scattered. The more they tried to put their reasons into words, the further they drifted from the actual quality of the jam. Wilson and Schooler called it the verbal overshadowing effect. The act of explaining did not clarify the preference. It distorted it. When people tried to account for their taste, they grabbed for features that were easy to name: sweetness, texture, color. But the real drivers of preference, the subtle notes and balances that made one jam better than another, slipped out of reach. The mind privileged what could be said over what was actually felt. This is not a story about jam. It is a story about what happens every time you try to explain why you like a song, or a person, or a painting. The moment you reach for words, you start listening to the words instead of the thing itself. It is like trying to describe why a melody works while the song is still playing. The act of explanation drowns out the music. You are right to feel uneasy about this, because the lesson is not that you are bad at explaining. The lesson is that the very process of explanation can bend the thing it claims to reveal. The more you try to catch your own motives in the net of language, the more likely you are to haul up something that looks convincing and feels true, but is quietly off target. This is not just about jam. The same effect shows up in face recognition, in art appreciation, in any domain where the real answer lives in a place you cannot quite name. The mind wants to privilege what is available to consciousness, what can be narrated, what can be justified. But the machinery that actually makes the choice is often running on a different track. So here is the inversion. The more effort you put into explaining your own preferences, the more you risk moving away from the truth of them. The story gets cleaner. The judgment gets worse. The door you thought you were opening to self-knowledge may be quietly closing behind you. And if introspection can bend something as simple as taste, what happens when the missing cause is not subtle preference, but a whole action your conscious mind never initiated? The left hemisphere press secretary. You are sitting at a table, but your mind is not all here, not in the way you think. Michael Gazzaniga and Roger Sperry, back in the 1960s, worked with patients whose brains had been split in two. Not metaphorically, surgically. The bridge between the left and right hemispheres, the corpus callosum, was cut to stop catastrophic seizures. The result was a person who looked whole, spoke whole, but whose mind was now running two parallel tracks. Here is the setup that made neuroscience famous. The patient sits facing a screen. A chicken claw flashes to the right visual field, which goes to the left hemisphere, the side that speaks. At the same moment, a snowy driveway appears in the left visual field, which goes to the right hemisphere, the side that cannot speak, but can move the left hand. On the table are a set of pictures. The right hand, controlled by the left hemisphere, points to a chicken. The left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, points to a shovel. Now comes the part that should make you uneasy. The researcher asks, why did you pick the shovel? The left hemisphere, the only part that can talk, has no access to the snowy driveway. It never saw it. But the mouth does not hesitate. The patient says, oh, the shovel is for cleaning out the chicken shed. Calm, confident, not a flicker of doubt. That is the punchline. The left hemisphere, with zero information about what the right hemisphere saw, invents a story that fits the available facts. It does not say, I have no idea. It does not pause. It does not even seem to notice the gap. The explanation arrives as smoothly as if it had been there all along. Gazzaniga called this the interpreter. The left hemisphere is not just a narrator. It is a press secretary. Imagine a company spokesperson who was not in the meeting, did not see the memo, but is still expected to explain the company's latest move to the world. The spokesperson cannot say, I do not know. They have to say something. So they do. And the story sounds reasonable, even when it is built on nothing. That is what your brain does. The interpreter's job is not to tell the truth. Its job is to keep the story running, to fill the silence, to make the world feel coherent, even when the facts are missing. The horror is not that the patient lied. The horror is that the patient did not know there was anything to lie about. You are right to be disturbed by this, because if a hemisphere can explain an action it literally had no access to, and do it with total confidence, what does that say about the explanations you give for your own choices? How many of your reasons are just the best guess of a part of you that was not in the room when the decision was made? It is not just a medical curiosity. The interpreter is working all the time. Every time you explain why you snapped at someone, why you bought that thing, why you fell in love or fell out of it, the press secretary is at the microphone stitching together a story from whatever scraps it can find. The story feels true because it is fluent, not because it is accurate. The silence after the answer is the most important part. The patient's explanation is so normal, so plausible, that you almost miss the fact that it is impossible. The mind's need for coherence is stronger than its need for truth. And maybe the most uncomfortable part is that you do not need your brain split in two for the same kind of story-making to begin. Your reasons arrive late. You snap at someone in traffic. You buy the thing you did not need. You send the text, flinch at a sound, agree to a plan you already regret. And then, almost before you have finished the action, the explanation slides in. It feels like it was there all along. But it was not. The lag is tiny. Sometimes it is a fraction of a second, sometimes a few. But the story always arrives just fast enough to erase the gap. You do not notice the delay because the narrative is smooth, like subtitles that appear a beat after the actor speaks. The words catch up, and your mind edits the memory so it feels like the story and the action were born together. This is not a rare glitch. It is the default. In 1983, Benjamin Libet wired up volunteers and found that the brain's readiness potential, the signal that a movement is about to happen, fired about 0.2 of a second before people reported deciding to move. The action started, and the story of why followed, but the two were compressed into a single feeling of authorship. You are not alone in this. In 1977, Richard Nisbett and Timothy Wilson laid out 4 identical pairs of stockings in a department store. Shoppers overwhelmingly picked the pair on the far right. When asked why, they gave reasons about texture and color, even though all the stockings were the same. Not one person said, "I just picked the last one." The explanation arrived after the choice, but it felt like it had always been there. Or take Petter Johansson's experiment in 2005. He asked people to choose between 2 faces, then secretly swapped their selection for the one they had rejected. Most people did not notice. When asked why they preferred the face in their hand, they calmly explained features they had never chosen. The story was not a lie. It was a patch, applied so quickly that the gap between action and explanation vanished. You have done this. You will do it again. The impulse buy, the sharp reply, the sudden attraction, the moment you agreed to something you did not want. The explanation feels original, only because it arrives quickly enough to erase the gap between what you did and why you did it. The brain hates blank space. It compresses the timeline, stitches the story to the action, and hands you a seamless memory. You feel like the author because the edit is invisible. The lag is the disguise. Once you notice the lag, an older and stranger machine comes into view. Cognitive dissonance, the engine that does not just explain behavior but rewrites belief to match it. When behavior rewrites. Belief: you are sitting at a table in Stanford in 1959, and you have just spent an hour turning wooden pegs, not building anything, not solving a puzzle, just turning each peg a quarter turn, over and over, for 60 minutes. It is the kind of task that makes you question whether time is real or if you have always been here, turning pegs. Then a man in a suit, Leon Festinger, asks you to do something stranger. He offers you either $1 or $20 to tell the next person waiting outside that the task was actually enjoyable. Not just tolerable. Fun. You take the money, walk into the hall, and say the words. Maybe you even smile. Here is where the trap snaps shut. Later, when you are asked how much you actually enjoyed the peg turning, your answer depends on how much you were paid to lie. If you got $20, you shrug. It was boring, but you did it for the money. No need to rewrite history. But if you only got $1, something weird happens. You say it was not so bad, maybe even a little interesting. You start to believe your own story. This is not a mistake. It is a system. Festinger and James Carl Smith ran this experiment to test a new idea: cognitive dissonance. When your actions and your beliefs do not line up, your mind does not just sit there and take it. It gets uncomfortable. It wants to straighten the picture frame. But if you cannot move the frame, if you cannot say, "I did it for the money because the money was laughably small," your mind tilts the whole room instead. You change your belief to match your action. You start to think, maybe I did enjoy it. After all, it is like coming home and finding a crooked painting on the wall. If you cannot fix the painting, You start walking with your head tilted, pretending the world is straight. The discomfort is not a bug. It is the engine. The less reason you have for doing something, the more your mind works to make the story fit. The brilliance of Festinger's experiment is how ordinary it feels. No hypnosis, no brain surgery, just a boring task, a small bribe, and a question. The result is a new belief, built not from discovery, but from the need to feel consistent. The mind cannot stand the gap between I am honest and I just lied for $1. So it closes the gap by rewriting the past. This is not about gullibility or weakness. It is about the machinery that keeps you feeling like a single, coherent person. The story you tell about why you did something is not just a report. It is a repair job. The less you are paid to do something odd, the more you need to believe you did it for a good reason. The explanation does not follow the action. It patches the hole the action left behind. That should bother you. Because if a single dollar can make you believe you enjoyed an hour of tedium, what else in your life has been quietly rewritten to keep your story straight? How many of your convictions started as awkward moments, patched over with a smoother explanation? This is the template. First you act, then you explain, then you believe the explanation. The logic is not just clever, it is ruthless. And if we can do that with boring tasks and a single dollar, moral life is not going to be any safer. Your moral intuition beats your moral reason. Jonathan Haidt sits across from a volunteer and reads a story that is designed to make you squirm. A brother and sister, both adults, on vacation in France, decide to sleep together just once. They use protection. They keep it a secret. No one is hurt. Haidt looks up and asks, "Is it wrong?" The answer comes instantly. Yes, of course it is. Why? The reasons tumble out. It could cause genetic problems. It might ruin their relationship. But Haidt is ready. He gently removes each reason. They used birth control, so no risk of pregnancy. They both agreed, so no coercion. They kept it secret, so no social fallout. The volunteer hesitates, then doubles down. It's just wrong. This is moral dumbfounding. The mind delivers a verdict before it can deliver a reason. And when the reasons are stripped away, the verdict stays put, like a stubborn stain. Haidt ran these experiments in the early 2000s, and the pattern was so reliable, it became a punchline in his field. People do not go blank when their reasons are taken away. They invent new ones, or simply insist on the original judgment, with no reason at all. Haidt called this the social intuitionist model. The idea is simple and a little insulting. Intuition first, strategic reasoning second. The mind makes a snap moral call, and only then does the lawyer in your head start assembling arguments to defend it. The lawyer is not there to discover the truth. The lawyer is there to win the case. If you have ever watched a friend justify a moral opinion that makes no sense, you have seen this in action. But the real discomfort comes when you notice yourself doing it. You feel the verdict land in your gut, and only then do you start reaching for the words that will make it sound reasonable. The words are not the engine. They are the press release. It is like a courtroom where the verdict is typed up before the trial even begins. The judge bangs the gavel, and only then do the lawyers file in, shuffling papers, ready to explain what has already been decided. The whole process feels backward, but it is so smooth you rarely notice the order. Haidt's studies did not just use the sibling story. He tried all kinds of taboo but harmless scenarios. The result was always the same. People clung to their moral judgments even after every stated reason was dismantled. Some would admit, with a sheepish smile, that they could not explain why they felt the way they did. But the feeling did not budge. You are right to feel a little defensive. The mind hates being caught in the act. But this is not a glitch. It is the system working as designed. The verdict comes first. The speech is support staff. But moral judgment is still only one corner of the house. The same architecture shows up when we explain why we trust, like, and remember people the way we do. The halo effect writes the script. You walk into a classroom, and the lecturer is already talking. You do not know him. You do not know the subject. But within 30 seconds, something in you has already decided, this person is warm, or this person is cold. You think you are just noticing. You are not just noticing. In 1977, Richard Nisbett and Timothy Wilson ran a study at the University of Michigan that should have made every job interview, first date, and performance review feel like a rigged game. They filmed a lecturer giving the same talk twice. In one version, he was warm and friendly. In the other, he was cold and distant. Same man, same accent, same face, same words. The only difference was the temperature of his delivery. After watching, students were asked to rate the lecturer on a list of traits. Not just warmth, but things like accent, mannerisms, and even physical appearance. Here is where it gets weird. The students who saw the warm version said his accent was pleasant, his mannerisms engaging, his appearance likable. The students who saw the cold version? Suddenly the accent was grating, the mannerisms awkward, the appearance less appealing. The same face, the same voice, the same gestures. The only thing that changed was the mood in the room. You might think, sure, people are influenced by first impressions, but I would notice if it happened to me. Nisbett and Wilson asked the students about that. Did your overall impression of the lecturer affect your ratings of his accent or appearance? The students said no. They insisted their judgments were based on objective observation. They were sure. They were wrong. This is the halo effect. One global feeling about a person quietly rewrites the details. You think you are explaining why you liked or disliked someone. In reality, the explanation is often just a list of details that have already been edited to match the first emotional verdict. It is like putting a red bulb in your living room and then swearing the couch changed color. You are not lying. You are just seeing through the filter and calling it the world. You have felt this. The new coworker who seems sharp, so you decide their jokes are funnier and their emails more professional. The date who makes you feel at ease, so you remember their clothes as more stylish and their stories as more interesting. The manager who rubs you the wrong way, so suddenly their handwriting looks sloppy and their handshake feels weak. You are not assembling a case from the evidence. The verdict came first. The evidence is just catching up. The cruelty of the halo effect is not that it fools you once. It is that it fools you every time and leaves you feeling more confident, not less. You do not just misjudge. You misjudge and then defend the judgment with details that feel like facts. You walk away from the meeting, or the date, or the interview, with a story about why you felt what you felt. And the story is full of specifics. But the specifics are already obeying the mood. And once first impressions can rewrite details, confidence itself starts to look less like evidence and more like stage lighting. Confidence is not a receipt. You are sure you remember. That is the trap. The argument in your head always starts the same way. I know what I felt. I know why I did it. I was there. The feeling of certainty is so smooth, so total, that it becomes its own evidence. You do not just recall the moment. You feel the receipt in your hand. But the receipt is a forgery, and the signature is in your own handwriting. Start with the courtroom. In 1977, Elizabeth Loftus sat in on criminal trials and watched as juries leaned forward, hanging on the words of eyewitnesses who radiated confidence. The more certain the witness, the more likely the jury was to believe them. But when Loftus compared the confidence of those witnesses to the actual accuracy of their memories, the connection was barely there. Some of the most confident people were wrong. Some of the hesitant ones were right. The courtroom did not care. Certainty won. It gets worse. In 2001, Ulrich Neisser and Nicole Harsh asked students to write down exactly where they were when they heard about the Challenger explosion. A year later, The same students came back and told their stories again, this time with the kind of detail you only get from a memory burned into the mind. But when Neisser compared the new stories to the original records, over a third of the details were wrong. The students did not blink. Their confidence had only grown. This is not a rare glitch. It is the system working as designed in Peter Johansson's choice blindness experiments. In 2005, people were asked to pick the more attractive of two faces. Then, with a sleight of hand, the experimenter swapped the photos. Most people did not notice. They looked at the face they had just rejected and explained, in detail, why they had chosen it. The explanations were not vague. They were rich, specific, and delivered with the kind of fluency that makes a story feel true. The only thing missing was any connection to the real cause. That is the part that should make you uneasy. The mind does not go blank when it loses the thread. It generates a cleaner, more fluent story. The smoother the explanation, the more convincing it feels. Psychologists call this fluency. The easier a story is to tell, the more likely you are to believe it. The more detail you can add, the more it feels like you are reporting, not inventing. But the fluency is a trick of the tongue, not a guarantee of truth. Think about the last time you explained yourself to someone. Maybe you snapped at a friend, or made a sudden decision, or felt a surge of attraction or disgust. The story you told afterward probably felt like a window into your motives, but the research says it is more like a press release. The details are assembled after the fact, stitched together from fragments of memory, language, and whatever emotional residue is still floating around. The story feels true because it is familiar, not because it is accurate. It is like finding a note in your own handwriting and trusting it more than the evidence in front of you. The signature matches. The paper is yours. But the content was filled in after the fact, by a part of you that cannot stand a blank space. Paul Ekman and Wallace Friesen showed in 1977 that people can fabricate detailed explanations for their own facial expressions, believing them to be genuine, even when the expressions were produced on command and not felt internally. The mind does not just tolerate a gap between action and explanation. It rushes to fill it. And the more convincing the story, the less likely you are to question it. The most persuasive witness in the courtroom of the self is often the least cross-examined. The voice that sounds most certain is the one you trust, even when it is the one making up the story as it goes. So the real question becomes brutal. If confidence cannot rescue introspection, why does self-explanation feel so intimate and so honest? Because the story feels like home. The oldest comfort in your mind is not a lullaby or a parent's hand. It is the feeling that if you can tell the story, it belongs to you. That if you can narrate what happened, the explanation is yours, private and privileged, like a key only you could have forged. But the story you tell about yourself is built from whatever is lying around. Old phrases, memory fragments, the labels you have been handed or picked up along the way. Ambitious, loyal, burnt out, avoidant. These words are like furniture you have dragged from house to house, arranging and rearranging until the place feels like home. Even if the blueprint was drawn by someone else. You trust the story because it is wrapped in your own language. You trust it because it feels familiar. But familiarity is not proof. It is just the echo of repetition. Dan McAdams at Northwestern spent years listening to people narrate their lives, and he found that identity labels are shortcuts. They compress 1,000 moments into a single word, and the word feels true because it is so easy to carry. Resilient, introverted, burnt out. The label is not a diagnosis. It is a suitcase packed with memories, some real, some guessed, all arranged to fit the shape of the word. Autobiographical memory is not a black box recorder. Ulrich Neisser, in the 1980s, asked people to recall where they were when the Challenger exploded. He found that the stories changed over time, bending to fit the person's current identity and emotional weather. The more the story was retold, the more confident people became in its accuracy. even as the details drifted. The feeling of truth grew stronger as the facts grew weaker. That should bother you. You are not foolish for trusting your own account. The mechanism feels like care. It uses the language of the self. When Timothy Wilson and Richard Nisbett laid out 4 identical pairs of stockings in a Michigan department store, shoppers almost always picked the pair on the far right. When asked why, they gave reasons about texture and color, denying that position mattered. The real cause was invisible, so the mind reached for whatever explanation felt available and familiar. The story was not a lie. It was a home-cooked meal made from whatever was in the fridge. This is the trick. Narrative coherence increases perceived truth. If the story fits together, if it uses the right labels, if it feels like something you would say, you believe it. The story feels personal not because it is accurate, but because it is assembled from your most familiar inner materials. Like a house built from your old furniture on someone else's blueprint, it feels like home even if the foundation was poured by a stranger. You overtrust first-person access because it feels private. You think, I was there. I felt it. I know why I did it. But the privacy of the story is not a guarantee. It is just another layer of insulation. The sa-o-kunyun feels true because it is yours, not because it is right. And while you are listening to this, your mind is almost certainly already producing a flattering explanation for why none of it fully applies to you. You are doing it right now. You are already doing it. That is not a trick. That is the move. Right now, as you listen, your mind is sorting, defending, and quietly building a case for why this is about someone else, or at least not about the part of you that matters. Maybe you are thinking, yes, I do over-explain my relationships, but my career choices are different. Or, this is exactly what my ex does, but I am more self-aware. Or, this is interesting, but it is mostly about people who are less educated, less introspective, less careful than you. That is the interpreter at work, not the topic of the video, the thing hearing the video. This is not a failing, it is the default. In 2005, Petter Johansson slid 2 photographs across a table in Stockholm and watched as people explained a preference for a face they had not actually chosen. In 1977, Timothy Wilson and Richard Nisbett laid out 4 identical pairs of stockings in a department store. Shoppers almost always picked the pair on the far right, then denied position had anything to do with it, inventing reasons about texture and color that could not possibly be true. The mind does not go blank when it cannot access the real cause. It generates a cleaner fake cause, instantly. But here is the part that should make you squirm. When people are warned about these tricks, the most common response is not horror or humility. It is a fresh act of self-exemption. The mind says, yeah, that is fascinating, but I would have noticed. Or, I am sure I do this sometimes, but not in the ways that matter. The warning itself becomes new material for the interpreter to work with. The very act of hearing about confabulation can trigger a confabulation about why the warning does not apply to you. It is like checking your reflection in a shop window while someone is describing vanity. You do not see yourself as the target. You see yourself as the exception. The more self-aware you are, the more likely you are to believe you are seeing the trick from the outside. But the interpreter is not a window. It is a mirror that follows you everywhere. And the more verbally skilled, the more educated, the more practiced in self-explanation, the better the rationalizations become. Keith Stanovich and Richard West found that people with higher verbal intelligence are not less prone to bias. They are just better at generating plausible stories to defend their choices, even when those stories are false. The interpreter does not get weaker with education. It gets more eloquent. There is a reason direct address makes you uncomfortable. Psychologists like Ethan Kross have shown that when people are spoken to in the second person, when the sentence says you instead of people or we, the brain lights up in the regions that handle self-referential processing. You feel seen. You feel slightly cornered. You want to retreat into abstraction, but the sentence keeps following you. And right now, as you listen, your mind is probably doing the thing it always does. Sorting, defending, building a case for why this is about someone else, or at least not about the part of you that matters. That is not a flaw. That is the system working as designed. The interpreter is not just a topic in this video. It is the thing hearing the video. It is the voice in your head right now, quietly assembling a story about why you are the exception, why your self-awareness is different, why your motives are cleaner, your explanations more honest, your insight more reliable. And if that feels unfair, the next evidence is worse. There are patients whose mouths explain actions their own speaking brain did not cause. The mouth that explains what it never knew. You are sitting in a hospital room, but your mind is not all here. Not in the way you think. In the 1960s at Caltech, Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga began cutting the corpus callosum in patients with severe epilepsy. The surgery was brutal but effective. It stopped seizures from ricocheting between the two hemispheres. But it also did something no one expected. It split the mind into two. Now imagine this. A patient sits in front of a screen. The word walk flashes to the right hemisphere, which cannot speak. The patient stands up and leaves the room. When asked why, the left hemisphere, the only part that can talk, does not say, "I have no idea." It says, "I'm going to get a Coke." The answer is smooth, instant, and completely invented. The mouth explains what it never knew. Michael Gazzaniga called this the interpreter. The left hemisphere is not just a narrator. It is an autofill form, completing fields it was never given. If the right hand points to a chicken and the left hand points to a shovel, the mouth says, "The shovel is for cleaning out the chicken shed." The left hemisphere did not see the snow scene that made the shovel make sense. It just cannot tolerate a blank. This is not a rare glitch. Patient PS, studied by Gazzaniga and Ledoux, could spell out the name of his girlfriend with his left-hand information only the right hemisphere had. The left hemisphere, when asked, would confidently offer a different name or a plausible story. The system would rather be wrong than silent. You might think this is a medical curiosity, a trick of damaged brains. But the insult is deeper. The interpreter is not a backup plan. It is the default output. When the left hemisphere does not know, it does not freeze. It invents. Silence is more threatening to the system than being wrong. It is like the autofill on your phone. You type 2 words, and the rest of the sentence appears, sometimes eerily accurate, sometimes wildly off. The machine cannot stand an empty field. It would rather fill it with nonsense than leave it blank. The left hemisphere does the same thing with your life. It fills in the gaps, smooths over the cracks, and hands you a story that feels whole. Gazzaniga described watching this happen in real time. A patient's left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, would perform an action the speaking brain could not explain. The mouth would not hesitate. It would generate a reason, any reason, to keep the story running. The interpreter is relentless. It is not trying to deceive. It is trying to keep the world coherent. That should bother you. Because if the brain treats not knowing as a cue to explain more, not less, then the stories you tell about your own actions are not just sometimes wrong. They are often built on missing data, patched over by a system that cannot stand a gap. The most disturbing part is how ordinary it sounds. The voice in your head is calm, fluent, and always ready with an answer. But the answer is not always evidence. Sometimes it is just the best guess of a machine that hates silence. And once you see explanation as a default output, one patient after another starts looking less like a medical curiosity and more like a distorted mirror. The patient who pointed first and explained later. The patient stands up. No warning, no hesitation. One moment he is sitting in the lab. The next he is halfway to the door. The researchers have just flashed a single word walk to the right hemisphere of his brain, the side that cannot speak. The left hemisphere, the talker, the storyteller, has no idea what just happened. He is already in the hallway when someone calls after him. "Why are you leaving?" He does not pause. He does not look confused. He says, "I'm going to get a Coke." Or sometimes, "I need to stretch my legs." The answer is smooth, ordinary, and delivered with the kind of confidence that makes you believe he planned it all along. But here is the trick. The real reason, the only reason he stood up, was because the right hemisphere received a command. The left hemisphere, the one that answers questions, never saw it. The body moved first. The sentence jogged after, trying to look like the leader. This is not a rare glitch. In the 1960s, Michael Gazzaniga and Roger Sperry at Caltech ran these split-brain experiments again and again. They would show a command like walk or laugh to the right hemisphere, and the patient would obey. When asked why, the left hemisphere would invent a reason on the spot. Not a wild story, not a joke. A reason that fit the moment, that made sense, that protected the feeling of being a single continuous self. It is like watching a news anchor read a script about a parade that already passed by the window. The anchor's voice is calm, the story is plausible, but the real event happened off camera. The explanation is not a lie, it is a rescue operation. The mind cannot tolerate a blank space where a reason should be, so it fills it in with whatever fits. And the most disturbing part, the patient does not feel any deception. There is no flicker of doubt, no sense that the story is a patch job. The confabulated reason is delivered with the same ease as any true memory. The interpreter in the left hemisphere is not trying to fool anyone. It is trying to keep the world coherent. You are right to feel unsettled by this, because if a person can begin an action for one reason and report another seconds later, with no sense of contradiction, then the smoothness of your own explanations might be less proof of truth than you think. That impulse toward continuity is not a bug in one damaged brain. It is the deeper rule that the mind would rather be coherent than accurate. Coherence beats truth. You are patching a crack in the wall with paint. The foundation is shifting underneath, but the urge to keep the surface smooth is overwhelming. That is the brutal design principle behind the interpreter in your head. Disconnected causes are intolerable. The mind stitches them into a single story, even if the thread is made up on the spot. Michael Gazzaniga saw this in the 1970s, working with split-brain patients. He would show one hemisphere a picture of a chicken claw, the other a snowy driveway. Each hand pointed to a different object. When asked why, the left hemisphere, the only one that could speak, did not pause. It said the shovel was for cleaning out the chicken shed. The real reason, the snow, was invisible to it. But the story arrived anyway, smooth and confident. The interpreter did not hesitate to invent a cause because a gap would have been worse. That is the part that should bother you. The system is not trying to lie. It is trying to stop the world from feeling fragmented. Fragmentation is expensive. It burns energy. It creates anxiety. It makes you feel like you are coming apart. Daniel Kahneman called the mind a machine for jumping to conclusions. He meant it as a warning, but it is also a survival strategy. Coherence is metabolically and emotionally cheaper than ambiguity. The brain treats a causal gap like a threat, so it fills it, fast. You see this in the stories people tell after a stroke. V.S. Clubbing and Ramachandran described patients with anosognosia paralyzed on one side, but utterly convinced they could move. When asked why their arm did not respond, they would say it was tired, or that they just did not feel like moving it. The alternative, admitting a blank space in the self, was unthinkable. The mind would rather invent a reason than leave the page empty. It is not just patience. It is you, every day. You snap at someone, then explain it was because of their tone, not the headache you ignored. You buy something, then tell yourself it was a rational decision, not a flash of envy or a memory you cannot name. The story feels honest because it is coherent. But coherence is not a receipt. It is a patch job painted over the cracks. Think about the last time you lost track of why you did something. Maybe you forgot a name, missed a turn, or felt a sudden wave of dislike for someone you just met. The mind does not leave those moments raw. It rushes in with a story, any story, to keep the surface smooth. It is like patching a wall with paint instead of fixing the foundation. The crack is still there, but now you can stop looking at it. This is not a flaw. It is the system working as designed. The interpreter hypothesis says the left hemisphere is always on, always stitching, always smoothing. It is not trying to deceive you. It is trying to keep you whole. But the cost is real. A tidy life story can be neurologically comforting and causally false. Plausibility outruns evidence, especially in the stories you tell about yourself. That is the first fracture line. If you can explain a preference you never had, or defend a choice you never made, what exactly is your explanation attached to? The answer is coherence. The brain may prefer a clean, false cause over an ugly causal gap, because coherence itself feels like survival. Which means even our most reflective tools can end up serving the same hunger for coherence instead of correcting it. Therapy can polish the story. You walk out of a therapy session with a story that feels cleaner, sharper, more yours than the one you walked in with. The pieces line up. The old confusion has a name now: attachment, boundary, trigger, abandonment. The language is elegant, the arc is satisfying, and for a moment, the pain feels organized. That is real relief. But relief is not the same thing as truth. A more articulate explanation of your past is not the same thing as a more accurate one. That is the quiet danger. Therapy, at its best, can help you see patterns you missed, name wounds you could not name, and connect dots that were scattered across years. But the mind is hungry for coherence, and a good story can arrive before the real drivers of behavior have even been touched. Jonathan Shedler's meta-analysis in 2016 found that insight-oriented therapies, psychodynamic, narrative, even some forms of cognitive therapy, often produce a dramatic increase in narrative coherence. People leave with a story that makes sense. But when researchers checked for actual behavioral change, the results were messier. The new story sometimes came first. The new life lagged behind, or never arrived at all. It is like putting a better frame around a blurred photograph. The picture looks more valuable, more finished, more worthy of display. But the details inside the frame are still fuzzy. You can describe the blur with perfect language. You can even convince yourself that the act of naming the blur is the same as seeing it clearly. But the frame is not the photograph. The language of therapy is seductive. Attachment style, boundaries, triggers, abandonment. These words are everywhere now, on podcasts, in group chats, in the way people explain why they left a job or ended a friendship. The words are not wrong. They are powerful tools for making sense of chaos. But they can also become a kind of identity shorthand, a way to sound fluent in your own history without ever testing whether the story predicts what you will do next. Esther Perel has written about this. She sees how people use therapy language to narrate their lives with more confidence, but not always with more accuracy. The story gets smoother. The behavior stays the same. Marsha Linehan, who developed dialectical behavior therapy, found something even sharper. Her patients could become experts at describing their emotional patterns, their triggers, their cycles of self-harm. They could talk about their pain with a fluency that would impress any therapist. But unless the therapy included concrete behavioral skills, actual practice, not just insight, the old patterns returned. The story was polished. The machinery underneath kept running. Stephen Hoffman's research in 2019 drove the point home. The most effective therapies do not just work through conscious explanation. They work through practice, through emotional processing, through changes in social context. The story is one tool among many. Sometimes it is the least reliable one. Here is the uncomfortable test if your new story about yourself does not change what you do, or how you feel, or what happens next. It may be a better frame on the same old blur. Behavioral change and predictive power are stronger tests than narrative satisfaction. If the story cannot predict your next move, it is not the engine. It is the press release. This is not an attack on therapy. Therapy can save lives, but the mind's hunger for coherence is so strong that even the best session can become another layer of elegance around the same hidden machinery. Relief is not the same as truth. A story that feels right is not always a story that works. And if polished stories still sound too abstract, the next stop is worse. Memory itself can be planted, felt, and defended like lived truth. False memories come with real feelings. You are sure you remember it. The smell of the food court, the panic rising in your chest, the way the tiles felt cold under your shoes. You were 5 years old, lost in a shopping mall, and the memory is so sharp you could swear it happened. Except it did not. Elizabeth Loftus proved it. In the early 1990s, Loftus and her colleagues ran an experiment that should make anyone uneasy about the raw material of their own life story. They brought in volunteers and asked them to recall childhood events, 3 of which were real, supplied by family members. The 4th was a fiction. You got lost in a shopping mall as a child, cried, and were eventually rescued by a kindly stranger. The story was detailed, plausible, and slipped in among the true ones like a single counterfeit bill in a stack of cash. Here is the part that should make you sit up. After a few interviews, about a quarter of the participants not only accepted the false event as real, but began to remember it. They described the color of the store, the feeling of panic, the face of the stranger who helped them. Some even remembered what they were wearing. These were not vague guesses. They were memories with texture, emotion, and the kind of detail that makes a story feel like it belongs to you. Loftus did not stop there. She found that the more people rehearsed the story, the more real it felt. The invented memory grew roots, sprouting new details with each retelling. Some participants felt embarrassed about being lost, others grateful to the stranger, a few even angry at their parents for not noticing sooner. The emotions were not faked. They were as real as the feelings attached to any other childhood memory. That is the unfair part. You can have genuine feelings, shame, relief, gratitude about something that never happened. The mind does not just record events. It edits, embellishes, and sometimes invents them wholesale. Once a false scene enters the autobiographical record, it is not just a story. It becomes a foundation for later explanations, beliefs, and even decisions. You might avoid malls, trust strangers more, or blame your parents for a moment that was stitched into your life after the fact. Think of it like editing an old family album. You slip in a photo from someone else's childhood, maybe as a joke, maybe by accident. Years later, you flip through the pages and swear you remember the day it was taken. The photo is now part of your story, and the line between what you lived and what you accepted has blurred beyond repair. This is not just a curiosity for psychologists. Loftus has testified in hundreds of court cases, showing that false memories can be so vivid, so emotionally charged, that even the person recalling them cannot tell they are inventions. The legal system, families, and entire lives have been upended by memories that feel as solid as stone and are as artificial as a movie set. The real wound is this memory is not a recording. It is a living document, rewritten every time you open it. The self you build from those pages is less an archive and more a construction site, with new stories poured over old tracks, smoothing out the gaps and cracks until even you cannot see where the edits were made. And if memory can be rebuilt that easily, the pages of a journal start looking less like evidence and more like fresh concrete being poured over old tracks. Your journal is not a black box. You open your notebook after a fight. The page is still warm from your hand. You write down exactly what happened, what you meant, what they meant, and why it all went sideways. It feels like evidence. It feels like the black box recording from the cockpit. the one that will settle the argument for good. But here is the trick your mind plays. The first story you write is not a transcript. It is a draft. And every time you reread it, every time you retell it, you are not just remembering. You are rehearsing. You are saving over the original file again and again, until the draft becomes the only version you can find. This is not a flaw in your character. It is how memory works. Elizabeth Loftus, who has spent decades studying how people remember, calls it reconsolidation. Each time you recall a memory, you are not pulling a file from a shelf. You are opening it, editing it, and saving it back. The more you revisit a story, the more confident you become in its details, even as those details quietly shift. In 2008, researchers James Smythe and James Pennebaker found that writing about emotional events in a journal made people more certain about what happened. The stories became more coherent, more organized, and more persuasive. But when they checked the facts, the details did not always line up. The act of writing had polished the story, not necessarily the truth. Ulrich Neisser, one of the giants of memory research, called this narrative rehearsal. The version you repeat is the version that survives. Your journal is not a neutral witness. It is a participant. It preserves what you believed at the time, not what actually caused the event. And the more intense the feeling, the more likely the story will privilege coherence over uncertainty. You want the story to make sense. You want to know who was right, who was wrong, and what it all meant. The notebook helps you do that. It gives you a place to rehearse the story until it feels solid. But that solidity is not proof. It is just the residue of repetition. You are not wrong to write. You are not wrong to want a record. But the danger is mistaking the first convincing story for the final word. The notebook is not a black box. It is a rehearsal space. Every time you open it, you are not just reading, you are practicing. Which pushes the question lower in the system. If stories are unstable, maybe the body is voting before the narrator even takes the microphone. The body votes before the story. You are sitting at a table in Iowa, staring at 4 decks of cards. The rules are simple. Pick a card. Win some money. Lose some money. Try to come out ahead. But you are not the one being tested. The real experiment is happening in your body, under your skin, before you have a clue what is going on. Antonio Damasio and his team built this setup in the early 1990s. They called it the Iowa Gambling Task. The volunteers were not just college students. Some were patients with damage to a part of the brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. These patients could talk circles around you about rules and probabilities. Their IQs were fine. Their memory was fine. But when it came to picking cards, they kept reaching for the decks that would ruin them. Over and over, they made choices that led to disaster, as if the part of them that should have screamed stop had gone silent. Here is where it gets weird. The healthy participants started to sweat. Not buckets, just a tiny change in skin conductance. Micro-flinch, a warning from the body. This happened before they could say which decks were bad. Their hands hesitated, their palms got clammy, and only later did their mouths catch up with a story about risk. The body was voting before the mind had even called the meeting. Damasio called this the somatic marker hypothesis. The idea is not mystical. It is mechanical. Your body tags certain options with a feeling: dread, excitement, a twist in the gut, based on past experience. These markers are not decoration. They are the steering wheel. When the system works, you feel uneasy about the bad deck before you can explain why. When the system breaks, as it did in those patients, you can explain everything and still drive straight into the wall. Think about driving on a windy day. You are holding the wheel, eyes on the road, but the car starts to drift. You do not notice the wind at first. You just feel the correction in your hands, the subtle lean, the way your body adjusts before your brain has even named the cause. By the time you realize what is happening, the real work is already done. The body is steering. The story comes later. That is the insult here. The reasons you give for your choices might be press coverage for a process that was already halfway finished before you started talking. The explanation is not the engine. It is the parade float that rolls out after the machinery has done its work. You are right to feel the ground shift under your feet. If the body can register the right answer before the mind can explain it, then the voice in your head is not the author of your life. It is the commentator, scrambling to keep up with the play. We are not thinkers who feel. We are feelers who think. And once action is being shaped below the level of verbal report, fast judgments stop looking mystical and start looking infrastructural. Blink decides. Story follows. You know the moment, the handshake that feels right, before you know why. The job interview, where you decide in the first 10 seconds, then spend the next 30 minutes collecting reasons to justify it. The friend you trust instantly, the stranger you avoid without a single conscious calculation. It feels like magic, or maybe instinct, but the real trick is how fast the story arrives to explain what just happened, as if the explanation was there all along. Nalini Ambady called it thin slicing. In 1993, she showed students silent video clips of teachers, sometimes just 30 seconds, sometimes only 2. The students rated the teachers on warmth, confidence, and effectiveness. At the end of the semester, those snap judgments matched the actual course evaluations almost perfectly. No words, no context, just a flicker of face and gesture. The same pattern held in hiring. Frank Bernieri found that interviewers formed their lasting impression of a candidate in the first 10 seconds, not after the resume, not after the questions. 10 seconds. The rest of the interview was mostly a search for evidence to support the verdict already delivered. It gets stranger. In 2006, Ambady and her team played short audio clips of doctors to strangers. The doctors who sounded warmer and more confident were less likely to be sued for malpractice. The listeners did not know anything about the doctor's skill or record. They just heard a voice, caught a tone, and made a judgment that tracked real-world outcomes. The body knows before the story forms. But here is the part that should make you uneasy. When people are asked to explain these instant likes and dislikes, they do not shrug and say, "I just had a feeling." They build a cathedral of reasons. They talk about eye contact, handshake firmness, the way someone answered a question. In Ambady's 2000 study, participants gave detailed explanations for their snap judgments about strangers. But when researchers checked, those explanations almost never matched the actual nonverbal cues that predicted their choices. The mind does not go blank when it cannot access the real cause. It just grabs the nearest plausible material and builds a story. Think about it like a train switching tracks before the passenger hears the announcement. The decision is already in motion, the direction set, but the story in your head is still catching up, still narrating as if it was steering the whole time. You feel the smoothness of the ride and assume you chose the route. But the switch happened in silence, under your feet, before you even knew there was a choice to be made. This is not just about strangers and interviews. It is the same machinery that decides who you trust, who you love, who you fear, and then hands you a script to explain it. Nonverbal cues, fluency, and familiarity do most of the heavy lifting. The story you tell afterward is often just decorative trim, added to a verdict that was already locked in. You are right to feel unsettled. Because if your careful reasons are just the last coat of paint on a house built by something older and faster, then the whole project of self-explanation starts to look less like a search for truth and more like a performance for an audience of one. Fast does not mean magical, it means hidden. But the most famous challenge to conscious authorship did not come from social psychology. It came from a lab measuring brain activity before people thought they had decided. Your brain moves before you say go. You were sitting in a lab in San Francisco in 1983, staring at a clock with a red dot spinning like a roulette wheel. Benjamin Libet tells you to flex your finger whenever you feel the urge. That is it. No trick, no pressure. Just say when you decided to move. but the real action is happening under your scalp. Electrodes are reading the slow, silent buildup in your motor cortex, signal called the readiness potential. Here is the part that should make you uncomfortable. That signal starts rising a full half second before you report the urge to move. Not after, not at the same time, before. Libet's team ran this over and over. The result was always the same. The brain's machinery for movement was already in motion before the story of I decided even began. When the data came out, it was not just a neuroscience paper. It was a cultural earthquake. The experiment seemed to shrink the territory of conscious will. The part of you that says, I chose, was arriving late to its own party. It gets worse. In 2008, Chun Seong-soon and his team in Berlin put people in an fMRI scanner and asked them to press a button with their left or right hand, whenever they felt like it. The scanner could predict which hand they would use up to 7 seconds before the person reported making a choice. 7 seconds. That is not a rounding error. That is a whole other room of the house. You are right to be disturbed by this. The experiment does not say you are a robot. It does not say you have no will. But it does say that the story you tell about when you decided is, at best, a late arrival. The conscious urge is not the green light. It is the press release. Think about a motion sensor in your hallway. The light flicks on before your hand even reaches the switch. You walk in, and the room is already lit. You can still decide to leave, to stand still, to wave your arms. But the first move was not yours. It was the system's. Libet himself tried to rescue something. He said maybe consciousness cannot start the action, but it can still veto it. You can stop your finger at the last moment. Maybe, but even that is a kind of damage control. The main event has already started before you know it. People have argued about this for 40 years. Some say the readiness potential is just background noise, not a true sign of decision. Others say the experiment is too artificial, too simple, too far from real life. But even the critics admit the wound is real. The timing is slippery. The story of I decided is not the first word. It is the afterword. And if timing is slippery, then the sense that you authored an action can be manipulated far more easily than most people imagine. The feeling of agency can be faked. You turn the key in your car and the radio blares to life, right on the chorus of your favorite song. For a split second, it feels like you made that happen. Like the universe queued up the track just for you, on your cue. That is the feeling of agency. And it is a feeling that can be manufactured, borrowed, or faked. Sometimes so well that you would bet your life on it. Daniel Wegner spent years chasing this ghost. In 2002, he published The Illusion of Conscious Will, a book that should have made everyone a little less sure of their own authorship. Wegner's experiments were not about tricking the gullible. They were about showing how the mind builds the sense of I did that from a handful of cues, and how easily those cues can be rearranged. Take the I Spy experiment. Participants sat at a computer with a partner, moving a cursor over pictures. Sometimes they heard a word say swan, and then a moment later, the cursor landed on a swan. The trick? The participant was not always the one moving the mouse. Sometimes the partner did it. But if the word swan was played just before the cursor landed, most people felt sure they had caused it. The closer the timing, the stronger the feeling. It did not matter that their hand had not moved. The mind stitched together intention and outcome, and the story of agency was born. Wegner found 3 ingredients for this illusion. First, priority. The thought or cue comes before the action. Second, consistency. The thought matches the action. Third, exclusivity. There is no obvious alternative cause. When these line up, the mind claims authorship, even if the real cause is elsewhere. Miss one, and the feeling wobbles. Get all 3, and you can make someone feel responsible for a movement they never made. This is not just a laboratory trick. In the world of facilitated communication, nonverbal clients appeared to type messages with the help of a facilitator. But when the facilitator was secretly given different information than the client, the typed messages matched the facilitator's knowledge, not the client's. The facilitators were not faking. They sincerely believed the words came from the client. The cues, timing, touch, expectation were enough to generate the feeling of agency, even when the facts said otherwise. It is tempting to think you would spot the difference, that you would know deep down whether you were the author of an action. But the system is not built for that kind of certainty. Agency is not a raw signal. It is a guess, a best-fit story built from the available evidence. Sometimes the evidence is clean. Sometimes it is a mess. The mind does not wait for proof. It fills in the blanks. Think about the radio again. You turn the key, the song starts, and for a moment, it feels like you summoned it. The timing is perfect, the match is close, and there is no other obvious cause. The feeling is real, even if the cause is not. That is how agency works. It is less like a security camera and more like a publicist, assembling a story that fits the facts as they appear in the moment. The punchline is not that agency is an illusion and you are a puppet. The punchline is that the feeling of control is a construction, not a receipt. You can be the author of an action and not feel it. You can feel like the author and be wrong. The cues that build the story are strong, but they are not infallible. Once authorship becomes inferential, post-hoc explanation is no longer a side effect. It is one of the tools the mind uses to make agency feel solid. Placebo reasons. Real effects. A woman with chronic pain swallows a sugar pill, listens to the doctor's careful explanation about how it will rebalance her chemistry, and 2 weeks later, she is walking farther than she has in months. She tells her friends it was the new treatment. She is not lying. She is not even wrong in the way that matters most. The pain is less. The story is just a few steps behind. This is the part that should make you uneasy. The body can change for reasons the mind does not remotely understand. In 1955, Henry Beecher watched soldiers in Italy recover from wounds with nothing but saline injections, and called it the powerful placebo. He thought maybe a third of all patients could improve just from the ritual, the expectation, the context. He was wrong about the number, but right about the principle. The story in your head and the driver of change can part ways completely. It gets weirder. In 2008, Ted Kaptchuk at Harvard ran a trial for irritable bowel syndrome. He told patients, out loud, that the pills he was giving them were placebos. No deception, no secret. Still, the patients who took the open-label placebos reported more relief than those who got nothing. The explanation was nonsense, and the effect was real. You can see it in the brain. In 2005, John Carr Zubida put people in a PET scanner, gave them a placebo for pain, and watched their brains release real opioids. The same chemicals as morphine, triggered by a story that was not true. Block the opioids with naloxone, and the pain comes back. The body is not faking. The body is obeying a cue. Sometimes the explanation is a story about chemistry. Sometimes it is a ritual. A white coat, a familiar bottle, a phrase that sounds like medicine. Sometimes it is just the expectation that something will change. In 2014, Luana Koloka showed you can even condition the effect, pair a sugar pill with a real drug enough times, and the body will start to respond to the sugar alone, even if you tell the person it is inert. Here is the part that should feel like a wrong turn on a familiar road. You can take the right exit because you followed the wrong sign. The outcome and the explanation can move in opposite directions, and you will still feel the story settle into place as if it had been steering all along. This is not just a trick of the mind. In 2017, a meta-analysis by Charles Worth and colleagues found that open-label placebos can help with chronic pain, depression, and irritable bowel syndrome. The effect is not magic. It is the body's generosity, responding to context, ritual, and expectation, even when the conscious mind is out of the loop. So you can improve for real while being completely wrong about why the improvement happened. The story is not the engine. Sometimes it is just a passenger, inventing a map after the journey has already begun. And if the body can obey hidden cues so easily, post-hypnotic suggestion shows what happens when the cue is planted and the reason is invented on demand. Do this later and tell me why. You are sitting in a quiet room and you stand up to open a window. You do not remember deciding to do it. You just feel a little warm, maybe restless. Maybe you want some air. Someone asks why you did it, and you answer without hesitation. You say it was stuffy, or you needed a breeze, or you just felt like moving. The answer feels smooth, obvious, and true. But in Martin Orne's lab in 1959, the real reason was not in the room at all. It was planted half an hour earlier, under hypnosis, as a simple instruction. When you hear the word experiment, you will stand up and open the window. The subject wakes, the conversation drifts, and then the cue arrives. The body moves. The mind follows. And when Orne asks, "Why did you do that?" the subject does not go blank. They do not say, "I have no idea." They say, "It was getting warm in here." Or, "I thought you wanted some air." The explanation is instant, ordinary, and crucially sincere. This is not a trick that only works on the gullible or the weak-willed. In the 1980s, Nicholas Spanos ran the same kind of experiment. He found that people under post-hypnotic suggestion would pick up an umbrella, move a book, or open a door, and when asked why, they would invent a reason that fit the moment. "I thought it might rain. I needed to check something." The real cause, the hypnotic suggestion, was invisible to them. But the need for a story was not. You might think this is just lying. But Peter Wagstaff and Ernest Hilgard, two of the most respected hypnosis researchers, spent years testing that suspicion. They found that these explanations were not strategic. They were not cover stories. The subjects genuinely believed what they were saying, even when confronted with evidence that their action was prompted by suggestion. As Theodore Barber showed in 1974, many still clung to their everyday reason. The mind would rather be wrong than blank. If this sounds exotic, it is only because the laboratory makes the process visible. In daily life, the same machinery runs quietly in the background. You find a reminder on your phone that you forgot you set, and you treat the action it prompts as a spontaneous idea. You reach for your keys, and only afterward remember you had planned to leave. The story arrives just in time to cover the gap, and the gap disappears. The real lesson of post-hypnotic suggestion is not that people are easy to fool. It is that unexplained action demands narrative cover. The mind cannot tolerate a blank space where a reason should be. So it fills the gap with the nearest plausible material. The explanation is not a lie, it is a rescue operation. Hypnosis is dramatic only because it makes a common process obvious. The same system that invents a reason for opening a window in the lab is at work every time you explain a feeling, a snap decision, or a sudden urge. The story is not always true, but it is always ready. Because the line between strange laboratory confabulation and clinical confabulation is thinner than most people think. Confabulation is not lying. You ask a man in the hospital what he did this morning. He tells you, with the kind of detail that makes you lean in, that his daughter visited. They walked in the garden, and she brought him a newspaper. He remembers the weather, the color of her coat, the headline on the front page. The only problem is, his daughter lives 300 miles away and has not visited in months. The hospital staff know he never left his bed. This is Korsakoff syndrome. It is not rare, and it is not subtle. It is what happens when the brain's memory machinery is wrecked by years of thiamine deficiency, usually from chronic alcohol use. The mammillary bodies, the thalamus, the frontal systems that keep track of what is real and what is not, they go dark. What is left is a person who cannot form new memories, who lives in a present that keeps slipping away, and who, when asked a simple question, fills the gap with a story that feels as real as the bed beneath him. The stories are not random. They are not wild hallucinations or fever dreams. They are plausible, detailed, and delivered with the kind of sincerity that makes you want to believe them. A patient might explain that he missed breakfast because he was out shopping, or that he is late for work, or that the reason he cannot remember your name is that he has just woken up from a nap. None of it is true. All of it is delivered with the calm confidence of someone who is not trying to deceive you. This is the part that should make you uneasy. Because confabulation is not lying. It is not a trick or a cover-up. It is what the brain does when the machinery for checking, cross-referencing, and error-correcting is broken. The frontal lobes, which are supposed to monitor reality and catch mistakes, are offline. The result is a mind that cannot tolerate blank space, so it patches the hole with whatever fits. The story is not a weapon. It is a bandage. Think of it like a jigsaw puzzle on your kitchen table. You are missing a piece right in the middle. Instead of leaving the gap, you cut a piece of cardboard, color it in, and press it into place. The picture is complete, but only because you could not stand the emptiness. The brain does the same thing. It would rather have a false story than a hole in the narrative. And here is the part that should make you pause before you distance yourself. The patient is not faking. He is not trying to fool you. He is not even aware that the story is false. The sincerity is total. The error is structural. The brain values continuity over blankness, and when memory fails, it fills the space with whatever it can find. Sincerity does not protect a story from being wrong. In fact, the more sincere the delivery, the more invisible the gap becomes. And once sincerity is no shield, the mind's deepest rule comes into focus. It hates empty space so much, it would rather fill the gap badly than leave it open. The brain hates blank space. You forget a name, you reach for it, and the silence is unbearable. In that instant, your mind does not wait patiently for the answer to return. It starts patching the hole. Maybe you picture the person's hair, their laugh, the street you last saw them on. Anything to keep the gap from echoing. The itch is not for the truth. The itch is for closure. This is not a quirk. It is a rule. The self-model, the running story you treats uncertainty like a leak in the ceiling. The moment a gap appears, the mind spackles it over with the nearest plausible material. You do not pause to ask where the water is coming from. You just want the hole gone. Psychologists have spent decades trying to catch this process in the act. In 1980, Michael Gazzaniga watched split-brain patients invent explanations for actions their speaking brain had not initiated. The left hemisphere, cut off from the real cause, would calmly supply a story anyway. In 1991, V.S. Ramachandran described stroke patients with paralyzed arms who denied anything was wrong. When asked why their arm did not move, one woman said, "I just do not feel like moving it." The story was not a lie, it was a repair. This is the part that should make you uneasy. The urge to fill blank space is not a conscious strategy. It is automatic, fast, and usually invisible. Daniel Gilbert and Timothy Wilson called it the psychological immune system. When something does not fit, the mind generates a reason before you even notice the gap. The cost of uncertainty is paid in accuracy, but the payment is made without a receipt. Think about the last time you lost track of why you walked into a room. The moment you realize you have no idea, your mind starts offering candidates. Maybe you needed your phone. Maybe you were hungry. Maybe you were avoiding someone. The answer does not have to be right. It just has to be there. This is not just about memory. It is about identity. The self is built on continuity, on the sense that the person who woke up this morning is the same one who will go to bed tonight. When a motive, a memory, or a chunk of time goes missing, the system does not tolerate the void. It repairs the timeline with whatever fits. The story keeps flowing, even if the facts have changed underneath. It is like living in a house with a leaky ceiling. Every time a new drip appears, you reach for the spackle. You smooth it over, paint it to match, and tell yourself the roof is fine. You do not climb up to check for rot. You do not want to know how deep the problem goes. The comfort of a seamless ceiling is worth more than the risk of facing the real damage. This is why people can defend motives they never had, remember events that never happened, and explain actions they never chose. The system is not trying to deceive. It is trying to survive. For the self, an inaccurate answer often feels safer than an honest causal void. You are right to be disturbed by this, because the cheerful examples, forgotten names, lost motives, the itch to explain, are only the surface. The same machinery that patches small holes will, when pressed, cover up chasms. It will keep the story running, even when whole parts of the body or world go missing. Because when a paralyzed patient looks at a motionless arm and calmly says she just does not feel like moving it, the machine is no longer theoretical. Imagine losing the storyteller and still feeling like you. You wake up tomorrow, and the voice in your head is different. Not silent, not gone, just different. The sentences still arrive, explaining why you want coffee, why you snap at your partner, why you feel like yourself. But the tone is off. The rhythm is wrong. The explanations are new, but the person doing the living somehow, unmistakably, still you. That is not a thought experiment. That is neurology. Michael Gazzaniga spent decades with patients whose brains had been split by surgery. The left hemisphere, the part that spins stories, could be cut off from half the world's information. Yet the patient would keep talking, keep explaining, keep sounding like a single person. The stories changed. The certainty did not. It gets colder. People with left hemisphere strokes can lose the ability to narrate their lives. Aphasia can strip away the fluent sentences, the running commentary. But the sense of being someone, of having a history, of wanting things and recognizing faces and feeling continuity from one day to the next, those things often remain. Antonio Damasio wrote about patients who could not tell you why they did what they did, but still felt like themselves. The voiceover artist was gone. The film kept running. And then there are the cases that should make you shiver. After a right hemisphere stroke, some patients lose awareness of their own paralysis. They look at a motionless arm and insist it is fine, or invent a reason why they are not moving it. V.S. Ramachandran described patients who would calmly say, "I just do not feel like moving it right now." The story mutates. The conviction stays. This is the part that should unsettle you. The left hemisphere interpreter is not the self. It is the spokesperson, the press secretary. The stories it tells can be swapped, broken, or replaced, and the person underneath does not dissolve. The sense of self is not a single node. It is a distributed system, a network of memory, sensation, habit, and feeling. The narrative is just the part that talks. Think about it like this. You are watching a movie you have seen 100 times. Suddenly, the voiceover changes. The new narrator mispronounces your name, gets the details wrong, but the footage is all there. The scenes are the same. The story feels off, but you are still in the theater, still watching your own life unfold. The voice is not the film. It is just the commentary. That is what happens in the brain. Damage the interpreter, and the stories change. The explanations get stranger, or thinner, or vanish entirely. But the person, the one who laughs at the same jokes, who loves the same people, who remembers the same childhood remains. The self is not erased. It is just forced to improvise with new material. You are right to feel a chill. Because if the voice in your head can be swapped out, and you still wake up feeling like you, then the thing you call me is deeper and weirder than any story you have ever told about it. The stories are not the self. They are just the best guess the system can make, given the tools it is left. And the first proof of that comes from patients whose confidence survives damage that should have shattered it. Different story, same conviction. You can change the story and keep the conviction. That is the part nobody warns you about. A woman wakes up in Milan after a left hemisphere stroke. Her words are different now. The sentences come out halting, sometimes scrambled, sometimes missing altogether. But ask her who she is, what she wants, why she did what she just did, and the answers arrive with the same force as before. The style is new. The content is new. The certainty is untouched. That is the part that should make you uneasy. Because if you can swap out the map, and the traveler never doubts they know the route, what exactly is the conviction attached to? In 2003, Dr. Anna Basso described patients who lost the ability to explain their actions in the old way. The stories got shorter, sometimes stranger, sometimes just blank. But the sense of being a single person, the feeling that the story was theirs, did not budge. In Paul Brox's clinic, a man with severe left hemisphere damage could not tell you why he did what he did, but he would insist, with total confidence, that he was still himself. The voice changed. The force behind the voice did not. It is like switching out the narrator in a movie halfway through, but the plot keeps marching forward as if nothing happened. The audience, your own mind, barely notices the swap. The conviction is not proof of accuracy. It is proof that the system needs a story, any story, to keep the lights on. That should bother you. Because if the story can change and the certainty stays, then certainty is not the signature of truth. It is just the signature of a machine that cannot stand silence. And nowhere is that separation between evidence and certainty ugly than in patients who deny the reality of their own paralysis. The woman who said her arm was fine. You are looking at your own hand. It does not move. The doctor asks you to lift it, and nothing happens. But you do not panic. You do not even seem surprised. You say, "I am tired," or "I do not feel like moving it right now," or "It moved just fine a moment ago." The hand is paralyzed, but the story is not. This is anosognosia. It follows a right hemisphere stroke, most often. The left side of the body goes slack, but the patient insists everything is normal. V.S. Ramachandran, in his clinic, asked a woman to clap her hands. She brought her right hand to the center. The left hand did not move. She looked at the empty space and said, "I do not want to right now." She was not lying. She was not confused. She was protecting something deeper than accuracy. The brain hates a blank. When the right parietal lobe is damaged, the system that updates your body map goes offline. But the interpreter, the part that keeps the story running, does not wait for new evidence. It fills the gap with whatever is nearest. Fatigue, disinterest, a claim that the limb is just a little weak. The explanations are not elaborate. They are not even creative. They are just enough to keep the world from splitting in two. It is like a dashboard warning light you insist must be wrong, while the engine smokes. You tap the glass. You say, "It is probably just a sensor." You keep driving. The body is sending up flares, but the story in your head is built to keep you moving, not to stop and investigate every contradiction. Ramachandran's patients did not argue. They did not protest. They simply absorbed the evidence and rerouted it. One woman, asked to touch her left hand with her right, reached across and patted the air. When told her hand was not there, she said, "It is just resting." Another, when shown her limp arm, said, "That is not my arm." The denial is not a strategy. It is a reflex. The system is built to preserve coherence, even if it means discarding the most direct evidence the body can provide. You are right to be disturbed by this. The lesson is not that these patients are deluded. The lesson is that the need for narrative stability can outrun the facts, even when the facts are as close as your own skin. The interpreter does not require truth. It requires continuity. And denial is only one form of the split. In alien hand syndrome, the body moves against the person's apparent wishes, while the story struggles to keep up. The hand that acts alone. You are buttoning your shirt. Your left hand slips the button through the hole, smooth and practiced. Then, without warning, your right hand moves to undo it. You watch as your own fingers work against each other, one fastening, one unfastening, as if you are a bystander at your own body's negotiation. You try to command the rogue hand to stop. It does not listen. Alien hand syndrome is not a metaphor. It is a diagnosis. In 1908, Kurt Goldstein described a patient whose hand seemed to act with a will of its own after a tumor damaged the corpus callosum, the thick bridge connecting the brain's hemispheres. Since then, the syndrome has appeared in patients with callosal and frontal lesions after strokes, tumors, or even surgery meant to treat epilepsy. The behaviors are not subtle. A hand might grasp a doorknob and refuse to let go, grope at objects unbidden, or even slap the patient's own face. In some cases, the two hands enter open conflict, one zipping a jacket, the other unzipping it, as if the body is a stage for a silent argument. The dread is not in the spectacle, it is in the explanation that follows. Patients do not simply panic or go blank, they explain. They name the hand, they call it the stranger, or speak of it as if it were a stubborn child or an intruder. One woman, after a stroke damaged her right frontal lobe, began referring to her left hand as if it belonged to someone else entirely. The mind, faced with a limb that acts outside its normal agency, does not surrender the story of self. It absorbs the anomaly, folds it into a new narrative, and keeps moving. That is the part that should unsettle you. Agency and explanation can split wide open, and the machinery that produces your story of self will keep working, even when the facts have left it behind. In 1991, Joseph Bogan and his colleagues described patients who, after the surgical severing of the corpus callosum, found their hands in open war. One hand would reach for a shirt, the other would push it away. The patient would watch, narrate, and try to make sense of it. The story did not stop just because the control did. It is tempting to think of this as a rare medical curiosity, something that happens to other people in neurology wards. But the logic is not so distant. Think of a shopping cart with a broken wheel. You push straight, but the cart veers left, and you find yourself explaining to a stranger that you meant to go that way, or that you are just browsing, when in fact you are wrestling with a force you cannot see. The story comes after the movement, not before. The most chilling part is how quickly the mind will personify the rogue limb, how easily it will invent a motive, a character, a reason. Silence is more threatening than being wrong. The system would rather have a false story than no story at all. A classic case from the 1970s. A woman's left hand repeatedly slapped her own face or undid buttons her right hand had just fastened. She described the hand as if it belonged to someone else. The explanation was not a confession of confusion. It was a rescue operation, a way to keep the self coherent even as the body fractured. You are right to feel estranged from your own hand for a moment, because the lesson is not that alien hand syndrome is rare. The lesson is that the mind's need for a story is relentless. Even when a limb behaves as if it has its own agenda, the mind strains to fit the event inside a coherent self-model. The explanation is not a witness. It is a patch. So ask yourself, what in your ordinary life counts as a softer version of the same split? The hand that clicks, send on a message you regret. The mouth that says yes when you meant no. The body that moves before the story arrives. The difference is only a matter of degree. And when the face in the mirror, or the person in the bed, no longer feels right, explanation does not stop there either. When feeling goes missing, story rushes in. You open your front door, and the house looks exactly right. The shoes are where you left them. The light falls the same way across the kitchen table, but something in the air is off. The smell is wrong. You know it before you know it. That is the kind of gap Capgras syndrome opens in the mind. Only it is not a house. It is a person you love. In 1923, Joseph Capgras and Jean Rabou-Lachaud described a woman convinced her husband had been replaced by an identical imposter. She recognized his face, his voice, his habits, but the feeling that should have come with that recognition, the warmth, the click of familiarity, was missing. So her mind did what minds do when a sensation goes missing. It rushed in with a story. The story was not random. It was a rescue operation. The percept was intact. She could describe her husband's features in detail. But the emotional signal, the silent music that should have played in the background, was gone. And when the music stops, the mind does not sit quietly in the silence. It invents a reason for the silence. The only explanation that fit the gap was that the man in front of her was not really her husband. V.S. Ramachandran, working with patients in the 1990s, found that this was not just a quirk of belief. It was a measurable break in the machinery. The temporal lobe, which recognizes faces, was still working. But the connection to the limbic system, especially the amygdala, the part that generates emotional response, was severed. The face was seen, but not felt. When Ramachandran's team measured skin conductance, a marker of emotional arousal, Capgras patients showed nothing when looking at loved ones. The body did not register the person as familiar, even though the eyes did. Haddon Ellis and his colleagues confirmed the same thing. Capgras patients could name their friends and family, but their bodies stayed flat, unreactive, as if they were looking at strangers. The mind, faced with this mismatch, did not shrug. It built a story to explain the missing feeling. The story was bizarre, but it was not random. It was the best available patch for a hole in the system. This is not a carnival oddity. It is a human tragedy. Because the same machinery that lets you know your mother's face in a crowd, or feel the warmth in a friend's smile, can be broken by a stroke, a head injury, or a psychiatric illness. And when it breaks, the mind does not go blank. It does not say, "I do not know." It says, "She looks like my mother, but she is not. Someone has replaced her." The story is wild, but the need for a story is not. You have felt a softer version of this. You have walked into a room and known something was off before you could name it. You have met someone you should have liked and felt nothing, then searched for a reason to justify the absence. The mind cannot tolerate a blank space where a feeling should be. It will fill it, even if the only material at hand is a story that makes the world stranger. A bizarre belief can arise not from seeing something impossible, but from failing to feel what should have been felt. The tragedy is not that the mind is irrational. The tragedy is that it is so desperate for coherence that it will build a bridge over any gap, no matter how thin the planks or wild the destination. Which means damage does not have to make the mind irrational in general. It can simply remove the signals that would have kept a wrong story from sounding right. Frontal damage, intact vocabulary, broken insight. You are sitting across from a man who can tell you his name, his birthday, the story of his childhood, and the reason he is in the hospital. He can describe his strengths and weaknesses, list his favorite foods, and explain why he sometimes gets into trouble. He sounds like the most self-aware person in the room, but then you watch him try to plan his day, or handle a setback, or notice a mistake. It is like watching a brilliant actor forget the next line and improvise with total confidence, never realizing the script has gone off the rails. In 1982, Donald Stuss and Michael Benson described patients with frontal lobe damage who could speak fluently about themselves, answer questions, and even reflect on their own deficits. But when it came to real-life planning, adapting, learning from feedback, they failed over and over. Their explanations for their actions were elaborate, sometimes beautiful, and almost always disconnected from what actually happened. Phineas Gage is the most famous case. In 1848, an iron rod shot through his left frontal lobe. He survived, kept his memory and language, but the man who returned was not the man who left. He could tell you who he was, but he could not live it. His plans fell apart. His promises meant nothing. The story stayed, but the insight was gone. Antonio Damasio called it acquired sociopathy. Patients with damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex can ace intelligence tests, charm a room, and talk about their problems. But they make the same impulsive mistakes, show poor judgment, and have no idea why. Barbara Wilson described a patient who could recount his life story and discuss his deficits in detail, but could not recognize his own social errors as they happened. His self-narrative was smooth. His real-world behavior was chaos. That should bother you, because if eloquence and insight can split like this, if the polished sentence is the least diagnostic thing in the room, then the voice you trust most may be the one least able to see what matters. It is like having a GPS that can describe every street in your city, but cannot tell you when you are driving into a wall. The map is perfect. The steering is gone. And here is the inversion. The more articulate someone is about themselves, the more likely we are to trust that they see themselves clearly. But in the brain, those are separate jobs. You can lose one and keep the other. You can sound like you know yourself and have no idea what you are missing. He could tell you his story. He just could not live it. And that matters because in ordinary life, high verbal skill often does not expose self-deception. It industrializes it. Insight language can become camouflage. You know the words: attachment style, trauma response, boundaries, self-sabotage, inner child. The modern self comes with a vocabulary so sharp and so current that you can almost feel the relief as you say it. You are not just feeling anxious, you are experiencing an avoidant attachment spiral. You are not just tired of your job, you are setting boundaries. The words are beautiful. They are expensive wrapping paper on a box you never opened. And here is the sting. The smarter you are, the more fluent, the more you have read, the easier it becomes to wrap your confusion in the most convincing language you can find. The label lands, and the investigation ends. You feel seen, but you have not actually seen anything new. David Rosenhan proved it in 1973. He sent healthy people into psychiatric hospitals, each armed with a single label. The moment the staff heard schizophrenia, every action, every silence, every hesitation was interpreted through that lens. The label did not just describe, it rewrote the evidence. Halberstadt's team showed it again in 2010. Give someone a label for a facial expression: anger, sadness, disgust, and suddenly they are sure. The ambiguity is gone. The label compresses all that uncertainty into a single confident story. The feeling of knowing replaces the work of actually knowing. And in 2007, Ethan Kross and Özlem Ayduk found that using psychological language to describe your pain can help you regulate it. But it can also turn real reflection into a kind of self-soothing. You narrate your way out of discomfort, but you never touch the mechanism underneath. This is the pleasure and the danger. Naming a pattern feels like understanding a cause. It is a shortcut that feels like a solution. You say self-sabotage, and the sting of failure softens. You say trauma response, and the mess of your reaction becomes a story with a beginning, middle, and end. But the label is not the mechanism. The diagnosis is not the repair. It is like standing in your kitchen, wrapping a box in the most beautiful paper you can find, tying the ribbon just so, and then putting it on the shelf without ever looking inside. The package is perfect. The contents are untouched. The smarter you are, the more dangerous this gets, because you can generate a label for every bruise, every hesitation, every late-night spiral. You can explain yourself so elegantly that you never have to ask if the explanation actually predicts anything, or changes anything, or survives contact with the next hard moment. Recognition is not repair. Naming is not knowing. The story that feels like home may be the camouflage that keeps you from seeing what is really there. Because beneath all that polished language sits the same machine, split-brain research pointed to decades ago, an interpreter that keeps narrating whether or not it deserves the authority. The interpreter never stops working. You are not the narrator of your own life. You are the commentator, and the game is already in progress. Michael Gazzaniga, the neuroscientist who spent decades studying split-brain patients, called it the interpreter. He meant the left hemisphere, but he could have just as easily meant the voice in your head right now. The interpreter's job is not to report the truth. Its job is to keep the story running, to stitch together whatever fragments it finds into a single, seamless account. It does not care if the thread is real. It cares that the thread is unbroken. In the 1970s, Gazzaniga watched as patients whose brains had been surgically divided would reach for an object with one hand, then explain the action with a reason that made no sense. The left hemisphere, which had not seen the real cue, would say, "I wanted to get a Coke," or "I needed to stretch my legs." The real cause was hidden. The explanation arrived anyway, smooth as silk, confident as a press secretary. The interpreter did not pause to check its sources. It filled the gap. That is the part that should make you uneasy. Because Gazzaniga's point was not that these patients were oddities. His point was that the interpreter is working all the time, in everyone. The same machinery that invents a reason for a hand's movement in a lab is the machinery that invents a reason for why you snapped at your partner, why you bought the blue shirt, why you felt uneasy in a meeting. The story is not a special feature you turn on for therapy or confession. It is the default setting. It is running right now, even as you listen. Think of it like a sports commentator calling a game they cannot influence. The players are already moving, the ball is already in the air, and the commentator's job is to make it all sound like a single flowing narrative. If a player slips, the commentator invents a reason. If a pass goes wild, the commentator finds a pattern. The game would go on without the voice, but the voice cannot stand silence. It must explain. But here is the twist that should make you stop multitasking. The interpreter does not just narrate the big moments. It narrates the gaps, the glitches, the things you barely notice. You forget a name, and the interpreter supplies a reason. You feel a flash of anger, and the interpreter builds a story around it. You change your mind, and the interpreter rewrites the past to make it look like you always knew where you were heading. The stitching is continuous. The story never stops. Ordinary life depends on this machinery. Without it, the world would feel like a jumble of unrelated events. Pattern completion is not a luxury. It is the price of sanity. But the cost is that you rarely see the seams. You rarely notice that the story is being built from whatever scraps are available, not from a privileged view of the real causes. That is the nightmare at the center of this idea. Your mind is narrating all the time, not only when asked. The explanations you trust most, the ones that feel like home, may be nothing more than the latest draft from a system whose only real loyalty is to coherence. And once you see the interpreter everywhere, your biggest life explanations start to look less like discoveries and more like retrofits. The career story came second. You know the story. The dinner party, the job interview, the late-night confession. Someone asks why you do what you do, and out comes the origin story. The childhood spark. The teacher who saw something in you. The moment of clarity, the calling, the mission. It sounds so clean you can almost see the straight line running from the first clue to the present day. But if you start pulling at the thread, the line kinks and doubles back. Underneath the headline, there is status. There's the job your parents did, or the job they warned you against. There's the city you could afford, the school that accepted you, the year the market crashed, the year it boomed. There's the friend who forwarded your resume, the neighbor who needed a hand, the mentor who noticed you at the right moment. There is fear, debt, admiration, boredom, and the quiet pressure of what people like you are supposed to do. Sociologist Mark Granovetter found in 1973 that most people landed jobs not through close friends, but through weak ties, those loose, almost accidental connections that no one puts in their autobiography. In 1999, psychologist Herminia Ibarra interviewed professionals who had changed careers and found that the story they told about why they switched was almost always built after the fact, with the mess and the failed experiments quietly edited out. A LinkedIn survey in 2016 asked over 10,000 people about their career paths. Nearly half said the most important events were unexpected opportunities or chance encounters, not a single clear calling. But when you tell the story, all that gets compressed. The detours become foreshadowing. The accidents become destiny. The constraints become character. You draw a straight line through a map of detours and call it a road. It is like looking at a river and seeing only the surface, not the rocks and bends underneath. Or like reading a recipe and believing the dish was always meant to taste this way, never mind the substitutions and the burnt first batch. The story is not a lie, exactly. It is a kind of emotional home renovation. You keep the parts that fit. You sand down the rough edges. You paint over the water stains. You make it livable. And there is grief in that. Because the story feels good. It feels like you. It gives meaning to the hours you spent doubting, the years you spent drifting, the moments you felt like a fraud. It lets you look back and see purpose where there was mostly improvisation. But there is relief too in letting the mess show. In admitting that your career is not a monument to a single deep reason, but a headline pasted over a pile of constraints and accidents. You do not have to give up the meaning. You just have to lose the illusion that you authored it all from the start. And if career stories are retrofits, the stories we tell about love and endings are usually even more aggressively edited. The breakup story is a press release. You know the sentence before you say it out loud. I outgrew them. They were afraid of intimacy. I finally chose myself. We wanted different things. The breakup story forms in your mouth like a press release, polished and ready for the next friend who asks what happened. Some of those lines are true, or at least true enough to pass inspection. But listen closely and you can hear the compression. The real ending was not a single moment or a single cause. It was a slow drift, a dozen small humiliations, a fight about nothing that was really about everything, a body that flinched before the mind admitted it. There were nights you rehearsed leaving and mornings you forgot why you were angry. There were resentments you never named, timing that never worked, and 100 moments too small or embarrassing to headline. But when the time comes to explain, you reach for the version that makes you look wise, not wounded. The story you tell is the one you can live with. It is the version that preserves your dignity, that lets you walk away as the person who learned, who grew, who finally saw the truth. You do not mention the pettiness, the jealousy, the way you checked their phone, or the way you stayed too long because you were afraid of being alone. You do not say you left because their laugh started to grate on you, or because you could not stand their friends, or because you were just tired. Memory after heartbreak is especially vulnerable to this kind of simplification. The rupture is so sharp that the mind rushes to patch the hole with a clean narrative. David Sparra found in 2010 that people who wrote about their breakups gradually smoothed the story, making it more coherent and positive, even when the real ending was messy. Daniel McAdams called these redemptive narratives the kind that turn pain into growth, confusion into clarity, and loss into a necessary step toward self-discovery. The messier the ending, the more tempting it is to flatten it into a slogan. Attachment language can help. You start saying things like boundaries, closure, self-care. Kate Fagundes showed in 2015 that people who used more of this language felt clearer about the ending, but their stories also lost the texture of what actually happened. The vocabulary is soothing, but it can turn a living, breathing relationship into a case study. You start to sound like you are reading your own press release. It is like rewriting the ending of a text thread before you show it to a friend. You delete the desperate messages, the late-night apologies, the parts where you begged or blamed. You keep the lines that make you look like the person you want to be. The story is not a lie, but it is not the whole truth either. We reach for the version that makes us look wise, not wounded. Which piece of your last heartbreak was explanation? And which part was just the version you could live with? Maybe self-awareness is editing, not seeing. You have been told to look inward, to close your eyes, listen for the true voice, and wait for the answer to rise up from somewhere deep and private. But what if the real skill is not seeing further in, but editing what comes out? Introspection feels like a searchlight. You point it at a feeling, a memory, a motive, and expect the truth to show up, blinking in the beam. But the evidence is brutal. Timothy Wilson and Richard Nisbett, 1978, asked people why they made simple choices, why they picked a certain shirt, why they liked a certain jam. The answers came fast, confident, and wrong. The real causes were hidden. But the explanations arrived anyway, smooth as a press release. Daniel Kahneman, 2011, said it even plainer. Most of what drives you is not just hidden, it is inaccessible. The mind is a black box, and the stories you tell about why you did something are often guesses dressed up as memories. Michael Gazzaniga's split-brain patients in the 1970s would reach for a shovel with one hand, and the other hand, the one that could talk, would explain it, was for cleaning the chicken shed, even though it had not seen the snow that was the real cause. The interpreter in your head is not a liar. It is an editor with a deadline and no access to the original source. That should be a relief. Because if you have spent years trying to peer inward, waiting for the real reason to appear, you are not broken. You are just using the wrong tool for the job. Introspection is good for noticing what you feel. It is terrible at uncovering why you feel it. Think of it like editing a manuscript. The first draft pours out, messy, repetitive, full of gaps and contradictions. The editor's job is not to treat every sentence as sacred text. The editor marks up the margins, checks the facts, asks for sources, and sometimes deletes whole paragraphs that do not hold up. Self-awareness, at its best, is not a confessional booth. It is a red pen and a skeptical eye. This is where the air comes back into the room. You do not have to trust every story your mind tells about itself. You can audit them. You can test them against what actually happens. You can cross-check your inner reports with your calendar, your spending, your habits, and the patterns other people notice. If you think you are a generous person, but your bank statements and your time logs say otherwise, the evidence is not an insult. It is a tool. Reflective practice does not have to mean endless confession. It can mean hypothesis testing. You notice a pattern, maybe you snap at people when you are tired, or you avoid certain tasks when you feel exposed. Instead of writing a story about your character, you run an experiment. You change the conditions. You see if the pattern holds. You ask someone you trust what they see. You clicked this video because some part of you knows. You don't want to wake up one day and realize you lived the wrong life. Because that's what happens. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Through every silent compromise, every lie you tell to fit in, every truth you ignore just to stay safe. Until one day, you open your eyes and you can't recognize the person staring back. That's not fate. That's a pattern. And Nietzsche, he saw it coming. You every silent compromise, every lie you tell to fit in, every truth you ignore just to stay safe. Until one day, you open your eyes and you can't recognize the person staring back. That's not fate. That's a pattern. And Nietzsche, he saw it coming. Because behind his rage, behind his bitterness, until one day you open your eyes and you can't recognize the person staring back. That's not fate. That's a pattern. And Nietzsche, he saw it coming. Because behind his rage, behind his bitterness, until one day you open your eyes and you can't recognize the person staring back. That's not fate. That's a pattern. And Nietzsche, he saw it coming. Because behind his rage, behind his bitterness, behavior knows before biography. There is a rule that feels almost rude, but it is the only one that works. If you want to know what matters to you, do not start with your self-description. Start with your calendar. Start with your spending. Start with the habits that repeat when you are not paying attention and the conflicts that keep coming back like a bad song. Your biography is a speech. Your behavior is a set of tire tracks. The speech is what you want to believe. The tire tracks are where you actually went. This is not a metaphor. In 2011, Wendy Wood and David Neal tracked people's days and found that about 43% of what you do is habit, not conscious decision. That is almost half your life running on scripts you did not write in real time. If you want to know what you value, look at what you do when you are not thinking about what you value. The calendar does not lie. The money does not lie. Bank transaction data shows that people routinely underreport what they spend on vices and overreport what they save. The story in your head is a press release. The receipts in your pocket are the real autobiography. And it gets worse. In 2014, Nicholas Epley and David Dunning ran a study where people tried to predict their own future behavior. They were less accurate than acquaintances who just watched what they did. You can be the world's leading expert on your own intentions and still lose to someone who just keeps a tally of your actions. Why does this happen? Because self-reports are built for coherence and desirability. You want your story to make sense. You want it to sound good. You want to believe you are the kind of person who calls their mother, who reads the right books, who does not doom scroll at midnight. But the system that writes your story is not the same as the system that runs your day. Behavioral traces are rude. They do not care about your feelings. They do not care about your explanations. They just add up. Every time you say yes to a meeting, every time you skip the gym, every time you answer a text in 5 seconds or 5 days, the pattern gets a little deeper. One moment can be an accident. A week is a mood. A year is a map. Think of it like this. You can give a beautiful speech about where you are going, but if the driveway is full of tire tracks leading in the other direction, the speech is just noise. The tracks are the truth. You can say you are a morning person, but if your alarm history says snooze, 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 the data is not on your side. You can say you value honesty, but if your browser history and your apology count tell a different story, the story is not the evidence. This is not an attack. It is a relief, because the more you look for meaning in the pattern, the less you have to torture yourself with confession. You do not have to get the story right on the first try. You just have to notice what keeps happening. Pattern detection is not as glamorous as self-discovery, but it is a lot harder to fake. The real punch is this. Your habits know your priorities long before your biography catches up. The story you tell about yourself is always playing catch-up with the evidence you leave behind. If you want to know who you are, stop listening to the speech and start reading the tire tracks. And once behavior becomes data, the next shift is even more useful. Stop asking why in the abstract and start asking under what conditions. Ask conditions, not essence. Why did I explode in that meeting? That is the question you reach for, because it feels like the kind of thing a self-aware person should be able to answer. But there is a better question, and it is not about your essence at all. It is about your conditions. Under what circumstances do you reliably become explosive? That is the question that turns the self from a mystery into a system. The difference is not subtle. The first question hunts for a trait, a flaw, a deep story about who you are. The second question looks for a pattern. It asks what was true in the room, in your body, in your calendar, in your sleep, in your status, in your hunger, in your shame, in your audience. It is less flattering. It is more useful. Situationist research has been hammering this point for decades. In 1971, Philip Zimbardo ran the Stanford Prison Experiment. Ordinary college students, assigned at random to be guards or prisoners, became cruel or submissive not because of their personalities, but because of the roles and context. The situation was the script. The person was the actor. The same person, in a different room, would have played a different part. You want to believe you are the author of your actions, but the evidence is relentless. In 1996, Roy Baumeister showed that ego depletion, mental fatigue from resisting temptation, makes people more likely to lose self-control in the next task. If you are tired, stressed, or have spent the day biting your tongue. Your odds of snapping go up. Not because you are secretly a rage machine, but because self-control is a resource, and resources run out. Sleep loss, time pressure, ego threat. These are not background noise. They are the levers that move your judgment and your self-control. You can track them. In 2011, John Mayer and Peter Salovey found that people who actually log their moods and the conditions around them get better at predicting their own emotional reactions. They avoid repeated conflicts. They do not become saints. They just stop being surprised by the same ambush over and over. Think of it like a stove. The burner flares only when the pan and the flame line up a certain way. You do not blame the stove for being a stove. You watch for the combination that makes it dangerous. Your outburst is not a secret code from your soul. It is a flare that happens when the right conditions stack up. Most people never see this. They keep telling heroic stories about their character, their values, their wounds. They miss the stable triggers hiding under the narrative. The meeting was not just about disrespect. It was about 3 nights of bad sleep, a deadline, a room full of people you needed to impress, and the old humiliation that never quite left your body. The story you tell afterward is a press release. The pattern is the real news. Condition tracking is not glamorous. It does not make you feel special, but it supports prediction better than any trait-heavy autobiography. It lets you see the next explosion coming, not because you have solved yourself, but because you have started treating yourself like a system with inputs and outputs. The most useful explanation for your behavior may be a list of conditions, not a story about your character. Because once you think in conditions, the old project of mastering yourself through insight alone starts to look wildly overrated. Insight alone rarely beats environment. You have probably rehearsed this fantasy 100 times. The moment you finally understand your pattern, you will stop repeating it. You will see the trap, name it, and walk around it like a person who has learned. The story is so clean. The story is almost never true. Walter Mischel saw it in the late 1960s, running the Stanford marshmallow experiment. The children who managed to wait for the second marshmallow did not just grit their teeth and stare down temptation. They turned their chairs away. They covered their eyes. They sang songs, fiddled with shoelaces, invented games with the table legs. The ones who succeeded did not have more willpower. They had better tricks for moving the marshmallow out of reach, even if only in their minds. You want to believe that knowing your weakness is enough, that if you can just see the pattern, you will not fall for it again. But the evidence is brutal. Knowing about a bias rarely neutralizes it. You can recite the definition of confirmation bias and still only notice the evidence that flatters you. You can read about the planning fallacy and still underestimate how long the next project will take. The interpreter in your head is a brilliant explainer, not a reliable mechanic. Catherine Milkman, in 2014, ran an experiment on what she called temptation bundling. She told people they could only listen to their favorite audiobooks at the gym. Suddenly, gym attendance shot up. The insight was not new. The structure was. People did not need a better story about why they should exercise. They needed a system that made the right choice easier to start and harder to avoid. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, in their book Nudge, showed that moving the cookies off the counter changes more diets than 1,000 speeches about discipline. Place the healthy food at eye level, and people eat more of it. Put the cookies in a high cupboard, and you do not have to win an argument with yourself every afternoon. The environment is not neutral. It is the script supervisor, the set designer, the lighting crew. It cues the action before you even know you are in a scene. Roy Baumeister in the 1990s thought willpower was a limited resource. He called it ego depletion. But the people who looked most disciplined were not the ones with the biggest reserves. They were the ones who avoided temptation altogether. They did not keep ice cream in the freezer. They did not walk past the bakery on the way home. They did not test themselves more. They tested themselves less. Think about your own kitchen. You can write a speech about how you will not eat cookies after midnight. You can journal about your triggers, your childhood, your stress, or you can move the cookies to the garage. The first approach flatters your self-image. The second one actually works. It is the same with pre-commitment. Ulysses tied himself to the mast so he would not steer the ship into the rocks when the sirens sang. He did not trust his future self to remember the lesson. He built a system that made the wrong move impossible. Modern versions are everywhere. Cancel the credit card for the website you overspend on. Tell a friend you will pay them $50 if you skip your run. Set your phone to grayscale so it is less addictive. The point is not to become a better person. The point is to become a person who does not have to be better in the moment. This is the part that should sting. The more you rely on insight alone, the more you are betting on the weakest link in the chain. The mind loves to explain, but the world is changed by friction, by cues, by the shape of the path. The disciplined are not saints. They are architects. And that failure of insight points to a harsher image of the self. Maybe the voice in your head is not a judge at all, but a lawyer. The courtroom in your head has no judge. You know the voice, the one that wakes up after a bad decision, not with a question, but with a closing argument. It does not sound like an investigator. It sounds like a defense attorney, already arranging the documents on the table, highlighting the evidence that makes you look good, quietly sliding the rest into a folder marked irrelevant. This is not a metaphor. Ziva Kunda named it motivated reasoning back in 1990. She showed that the mind does not just gather facts, it gathers the right facts, the ones that let you keep your story straight, your status intact, your innocence plausible. Dan Kahan at Yale found something even meaner. The smarter you are, the better you get at defending your favorite beliefs, not at finding the truth. He called it identity protective cognition. The mind is not a neutral judge. It is a lawyer with a client to protect, and that client is your self-image. You have felt this. You make a mistake, and the explanation arrives not as a confession, but as a press release. I was tired. They were unclear. Anyone would have done the same. The story is smooth, almost soothing. Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson spent years documenting this in their book Mistakes Were Made But Not By Me. They found that self-justification is not a rare event. It is the default. The mind will do almost anything to preserve the sense that you are good, reasonable, and consistent, even if it means rewriting the facts in real time. It feels like clarity from the inside. David Dunning, the psychologist behind the Dunning-Kruger effect, wrote that self-justification is so convincing because it feels like insight. You do not feel yourself building a defense. You feel yourself discovering the truth. But the truth is not the goal. Continuity is. Innocence is. The story is there to keep you whole, not to keep you honest. Think about how a real defense attorney works. They do not start with the evidence and see where it leads. They start with the verdict they want and work backward, selecting the testimony, the precedent, the angle that will get their client off the hook. Your mind does the same. It softens the inconvenient facts, polishes the details, and aims above all to preserve your standing in your own eyes. Dan Ariely ran experiments where people cheated for small gains, then spun elaborate stories to themselves about why it was not really cheating. The narrative was not just a cover for others. It was a cover for the self. Michael Gazzaniga, the neuroscientist, called the left hemisphere of the brain the interpreter. He said it acts like a defense attorney, assembling a story to explain actions and beliefs, even when the real causes are hidden or contradictory. The interpreter does not care if the story is true. It cares if the story is smooth. You are not alone in this. Everyone you know is running the same courtroom in their head. The judge's bench is empty. The only voice that matters is the one building the case for the defense. And the more you care about your image, your status, your innocence, your continuity, the more creative and convincing the story becomes. So here is the question that should make you laugh, then go very still. How many of your deepest explanations were really just opening statements? If your inner account is a courtroom brief, then outside observers may sometimes have cleaner access to your motives than you do. Your friends may know this part better. You probably think you know your own patterns better than anyone else. That is the default assumption. You are the one inside your head, after all. But here is the bruise. Sometimes, the people around you have a less distorted map of your motives than the story you tell yourself. This is not just a clever insult. In the 1990s, David Funder ran studies where friends and acquaintances predicted a person's behavior in new situations. The result? For traits you can see, like talkativeness or sociability, outsiders sometimes beat the person themselves. Not because they are psychic, but because they are watching from the outside, collecting data, and not as invested in protecting a particular story. Simon Vazir, in 2006, found something even sharper. When it came to traits that were hard to observe or loaded with ego-like intelligence or creativity, self-reports got fuzzy. Friends did better for the things you can see, like who actually talks the most at a party. But for the traits that feel most private, the self-report was often just a mirror fogged by hope and anxiety. And then there is the meta-analysis by Connor McRae in 2010. When researchers looked at who could best predict life outcomes, job performance, relationship satisfaction, it was often the observer ratings that won. Not always, but enough to make you pause. Your friends, your partner, the people who see you over time, can sometimes see the pattern before you do. It is like your neighbors noticing the route your car takes every morning. You are inside, thinking about the music, the coffee, the day ahead. They are outside, watching the pattern. You might not realize you always turn left at the same intersection until someone else points it out. The pattern is visible from the curb, not the driver's seat. Why does this happen? Because the people around you are not as tangled up in your identity stakes. They do not have to defend your story. They are not invested in making you the hero or the victim. They just see what happens, again and again, across different days and moods. They notice the base rate, not just the dramatic exception. You, on the other hand, are living inside the emotional vividness of your private story. Every explanation you give is filtered through what you want to be true, what you fear is true, and what you need to believe to keep moving. That is not a flaw. It is just the cost of being the protagonist. But here is the small gift inside the bruise. Self-knowledge does not have to be a solo project. The most honest map of your motives might be a group effort. Your friends, your partner, even your coworkers. These are the people who see the repeated patterns, the slips, the habits you stopped noticing. They are not always right, but they are often less wrong than the voice in your head. Humility, then, is not just a virtue. It is a method. If you want to know yourself, do not just look inward. Ask the people who have been watching. Compare notes. Let their observations bruise your story a little. Because sometimes, the truth about you is hiding in plain sight, just outside your own line of vision. And once you accept outside data, another habit becomes obvious. Collect patterns and probabilities, not just emotionally satisfying turning points. Base rates beat epiphanies. You know the feeling, the lightning bolt, the moment in the shower or on a walk or at 3 in the morning when you finally see it. The pattern, the reason, the breakthrough. You write it down, you text a friend, you feel lighter. And by next Tuesday, nothing has changed except the story you tell about last week. This is not a personal failing. It is a design feature. The mind is built to chase the vivid, the dramatic, the single turning point. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky gave it a name in the 1970s, the availability heuristic. If something is easy to picture, if it glows in memory, it feels more true. The boring, the repeated, the spreadsheet row, those get ignored. The interpreter in your head is a sucker for a good headline and a terrible accountant. But the numbers do not care about your epiphany, they just keep adding up. James Clear, the habit guy, says it straight. If you want to change, track what you do, not what you think. He is not alone. B.J. Fogg at Stanford built a whole lab around the idea that small, trackable actions, tiny habits, beat the pants off single moments of motivation. The research is brutal. The more you log, the more you see. The less you log, the more you believe your own press releases. Here is the indignity. A kitchen scale, the kind you bought for baking and then forgot in a drawer, will tell you more about your eating habits than a year of self-reflection. You clicked this video because some part of you knows. You don't want to wake up one day and realize you lived the wrong life. Because that's what happens. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Through every silent compromise, every lie you tell to fit in, every truth you ignore just to stay safe. Until one day, you open your eyes and you can't recognize the person staring back. That's not fate. That's a pattern. And Rizima Protein, not to prot. As you to savior fall, let's of course like us. You can guess, you can feel, you can have a breakthrough about why you snack at night. Or you can write down what you eat, when you eat it, and watch the pattern emerge like a stain. The scale does not care about your narrative. It just reports the weight. This is not just about food. In 2010, Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert tracked the moods and activities of over 15,000 people using smartphones. Not a single epiphany in the bunch, just pings, logs, and repeated measures. What did they find? That happiness and mind-wandering are not mysteries to be solved in a single flash of insight. They are patterns, visible only when you stack the days and look for the shape that emerges. Mood, conflict, spending, avoidance. These are not secrets waiting for a breakthrough. They are numbers waiting for a log. The spreadsheet is not glamorous. It does not make you feel like a genius, but it will tell you, with the cold honesty of a kitchen scale, what is actually happening in your life. The interpreter hates this. It wants a story, a revelation, a moment of clarity. It wants to believe that the day you realized you are a people pleaser was the day everything changed. But the log knows better. The log knows how many times you said yes when you meant no. The log knows how many dollars left your account after midnight. The log knows how many days you woke up tired and blamed it on fate instead of the third glass of wine. Behavior change research is not built on epiphany. It is built on tracking, on repeated, boring, almost administrative acts of noticing. The spreadsheet is the hero, not the villain. The breakthrough is just the press release. So here is the punchline, and it is not flattering. A boring log of repeated behavior can tell the truth about you more reliably than a profound insight ever will. The kitchen scale beats your best guess every single morning. And once story loses its monopoly on truth, identity itself starts to look less like a discovery and more like a useful compression format. Identity is a compression algorithm. You have a label for yourself? Maybe you have a dozen. Creative, anxious, driven, old soul, people pleaser. You say them at parties. You write them in journals. You hear them in your head when you are trying to explain why you did something that does not quite make sense. These labels feel like handles on the machinery. They make life manageable. They make you portable to yourself. But here is the trick nobody warns you about. Every label is a zip file. It is a compressed archive of 1,000 moments, boiled down to a single word you can carry in your pocket. The label introvert is not a full record of every Friday night you stayed in, every party you left early, every time you surprised yourself by loving a crowd. It is a shortcut. It opens fast because it discarded the detail. Hazel Marcus, back in 1978, called these self-schemas. They are the cognitive blueprints you use to sort, store, and retrieve everything you know about yourself. They are not lies. They are not even mistakes. They are the only way to keep the chaos of your own history from flooding the system. Dan McAdams, in 2001, said identity is a life story. It is a narrative that stitches together the past, the present, and the future into something you can tell at dinner. It is not a transcript. It is a highlight reel. This is not a flaw. It is a feature. If you had to remember every contradiction, every exception, every time you broke your own pattern, you would never finish a sentence about who you are. The compression is what lets you function. It is what lets you say, I am a creative person, instead of reciting every time you failed to create, or created badly, or created for reasons you do not understand. But the cost is real. Compression trades detail for usability. The more elegant the label, the more it hides. Sam Gosling in 2010 showed that even the most basic personality traits, introvert, extravert, are only rough guides. Your actual behavior is a mess of context, mood, company, and accident. The label is useful for memory and for social coordination. It is disastrous if you mistake it for the full file. Think about the last time you called yourself anxious. Did you mean every hour of every day? Or did you mean the moments that fit the label? The ones that come to mind first? The ones that feel like the core of the story? The rest gets zipped up, archived, left out of the narrative. The label stabilizes your sense of self. It makes you easier to explain to others. It also distorts the causes. It makes the story feel continuous, even when the reality is situational, variable, and full of exceptions. It is like keeping your entire photo library on your phone as thumbnails. You can scroll fast, you can show someone a highlight, but you cannot see the detail until you open the file. And most of the time, you do not open the file. You just trust the thumbnail. This is not a call to throw away your labels. You need them. They are the only way to keep moving through a world that demands a story. But every time you reach for one, remember what it cost. The label is not the life. The summary is not the source. The story is not the system. So hold your favorite labels with a little suspicion. They are useful, but they are not complete. They are the price of being able to say, I, and have it mean something you can carry. Which brings us back to the interpreter itself. The machine that keeps compressing, smoothing, and presenting a life as if it were authored from a single center. The narrator did not write the plot. The voice in your head, the one that explains why you did what you did, is not the author of your story. It is the narrator. And the narrator did not write the plot. Start with the faces in Stockholm. In 2005, Petter Johansson slid 2 photographs across a table and asked people which face they preferred. After they chose, he swapped the photos without their knowledge and handed them the one they had just rejected. Most people did not notice. They looked at the wrong face and explained, in detail, why they liked it best. They talked about the eyes, the smile, the warmth. They invented reasons for a preference they never had. The explanation arrived on time. The preference never did. Move to the department store in 1977. 4 pairs of identical nylon stockings, laid out left to right. Shoppers overwhelmingly picked the pair on the far right. When asked why, they talked about texture, weave, and color. Not one mentioned position. Not one admitted the real cause. The mind did not go blank when it lost access to the truth. It filled the gap with a cleaner lie, now split the brain. Michael Gazzaniga, 1970s. A patient with the bridge between hemispheres severed. Show a chicken claw to the left hemisphere, a snowy driveway to the right. The right hand points to a chicken, the left hand to a shovel. When asked why the left hand picked the shovel, the speaking hemisphere, which never saw the snow, says, "That's for cleaning out the chicken shed." The story is smooth. The story is wrong. The story is all that survives. Go deeper. Oliver Sacks, Korsakoff's patients, the confabulators. They forget where they have been, what they have done, who they have seen. But when asked, they do not say, "I do not know." They spin stories, rich and sincere, about visits that never happened and days that never were. This is not lying. This is the brain refusing to leave a blank space in the narrative. And then, the everyday version. The career story you tell at dinner. The breakup story you rehearse in the shower. The origin myth you polish for job interviews. Each one is a movie trailer selling a film it did not direct. The trailer is tight, dramatic, and clear. The film is messy, full of scenes that never made the cut, motives that contradict, accidents that shaped everything. But the trailer is what you remember. The trailer is what you show. This is the inversion at the heart of the whole story. The part of you that best explains your behavior is downstream from the systems that generated it. The explanation is a rendering layer, not the engine. The face you chose, the stocking you picked, the hand that moved, the memory you defend, the life you narrate. Each one is a product of machinery that runs before the narrator even starts talking. And the machinery does not care about coherence. It cares about survival, about comfort, about filling the gap. The narrator's job is to make it all make sense, even when it does not. That is why the explanations feel so intimate, so honest, so necessary. They are not evidence. They are cover stories. They are the best guess of a system that cannot tolerate a void. You are right to feel uneasy about this. Because if the narrator is not the author, then the story you tell about yourself is not a confession. It is a press release. It is a highlight reel. It is a stitched-together account that hides the seams and edits out the scenes that do not fit. So the last question is not whether the narrator lies. It is what kind of life becomes possible once you stop demanding that the narrator be your deepest source of truth. The interpreter is still talking. You have been listening to all this evidence, and while you listened, something else was working just as hard. The interpreter, the same machinery that stitched together your childhood, your career, your last argument, has been quietly translating every uncomfortable fact into a story that fits. Not just fits the data, but fits you. It preserves your dignity, your sense of continuity, and maybe, if you are honest, one cherished exception. The voice in your head is not just a narrator. It is a full-time publicist, and it does not take breaks. You might think that seeing the trick would end it, that meta-awareness would be the solvent. But here is the trap. Meta-awareness does not abolish the process it notices. It just gives the interpreter new material. You learn about choice blindness, and now you have a story about how you are the kind of person who knows about choice blindness. You read about Michael Gazzaniga's split-brain patients inventing reasons for actions they never chose, and you feel a little safer, because you would never do that. You know about bias, so you are less biased. Richard Nisbett spent decades showing that bias literacy rarely removes bias. It just gets folded into the next self-description. The interpreter is not threatened by critique. It is fed by it. Think of a security camera pointed at its own monitor. The image loops back, endlessly self-referential, always watching, always narrating, but never stepping outside the system. You can see the grain, the flicker, the delay, but you cannot see the room from the outside. The interpreter is the camera, the monitor, and the commentary all at once. Every attempt to catch it in the act becomes another act for it to narrate. You might feel a little claustrophobic right now. That is not a mistake. That is the right feeling. Because the interpreter is not just a feature of your mind. It is the environment your mind lives in. Even the conclusion that you confabulate, yes, I do that. I am self-aware about my self-deception, can itself be turned into a flattering new self-story by the same confabulating system. Daniel Wegner wrote in 2002 that the feeling of agency is constructed after the fact and can be manipulated by changing the cues. But knowing that does not make you immune. It just gives your interpreter a new badge to wear. You are right to be disturbed by this, because the warning cannot arrive from outside the system. Every insight, every critique, every moment of humility is still narrated by the same machinery. The interpreter is not a liar, exactly. It is a continuity engine. It hates blank space. It will fill the gap with whatever is nearest, and then tell you that was always the plan. Maybe you have noticed this in your own life. You read a book about cognitive bias, and for a week you see bias everywhere except in your own decisions. You learn about confabulation, and now you are the kind of person who knows about confabulation. The interpreter is tireless. It can incorporate any evidence, any critique, any defeat, and turn it into a new story about who you are. There is no final escape. The system that narrates your life is the same system that narrates its own exposure. You cannot step outside and get a clean look. You can only watch the loops, the edits, the way every new fact is metabolized into a slightly more sophisticated version of the same old story. So instead of trying to silence the voice, let us end by watching what happens when it attaches itself to the most intimate moments in a life. Why you snapped in that meeting? You are in the meeting, and you already know the moment I am talking about. The stray comment, the pulse that jumps, the sentence that comes out sharper than you meant, or maybe sharper than you even realized until the room went quiet. You feel the heat in your face, the sudden clarity of your own voice, and then, almost instantly, the story forms. You snapped because you care about respect, because you will not be talked down to, because you have principles. But if you slow the tape, the story starts to blur. The noble explanation is the last thing to arrive. Let's rewind. The night before, you slept 4 hours, maybe 5. Matthew Walker at Berkeley could tell you what that does. The amygdala, the part of your brain that sounds the alarm, is now firing 60% harder. The prefrontal cortex, the part that usually keeps you from saying the thing you will regret, is running on fumes. You walk into the meeting already closer to the edge. Then there is the room itself. You are not just talking to one person. You are being watched. Status is on the line. In 2012, Ethan Kross and his team showed that when people feel rejected in front of others, their bodies react as if they have been physically hurt. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense. The mind starts scanning for threat, and ambiguous comments suddenly sound like attacks. The more public the setting, the more the body reads every word as a test of rank. Now add the rest, the old humiliation that never quite faded, the hunger you ignored all morning, the friction from a week of small slights and unsaid things. Each one is a degree on the stove. The kettle does not scream because of the last second of heat. It screams because the water has been building toward boiling for a long time, and you only notice the noise when it is already too late. In that moment, your body narrows the world. Iris Mouse and her colleagues found that acute arousal, heart-pounding, skin-prickling shrinks your ability to interpret what is happening. You stop seeing shades of gray. You start seeing intention where there might be none. The story you tell yourself after is clean and principled, because the real machinery is too messy to narrate. And here is the part that should make you pause. After the meeting, you replay what happened. You explain it to yourself, maybe to a friend. The explanation is smooth. It is about values, or boundaries, or the line you will not let anyone cross. But the research is brutal. Post-conflict explanations almost always overstate principle and understate condition. The story is not a lie, but it is not the whole truth. It is the version that lets you keep your dignity. You are right to feel unsettled by this, because it means that the most convincing story you have about why you snapped is probably the one that arrived last, not first. The real causes were already in motion before you even opened your mouth. So the next time you feel the urge to explain a sharp word as a matter of principle, remember the kettle. The whistle is loud, but the heat was building long before you heard it. And the same thing happens on a larger scale when we explain why we stayed, left, or loved the way we did. Why you ended that relationship. You are not in the breakup anymore. You are on the long walk after, phone in your hand, scrolling through old messages, feeling the clean explanation start to form. It is almost a relief how quickly the story arrives. We wanted different things. She was never really present. I finally chose myself. The sentence is so smooth you could hand it to a friend and they would nod. It is the kind of line you could put in a press release, if breakups had publicists. But the cleaner your explanation, the more likely it is to have edited out the most important details. Not the cinematic betrayal or the one big fight, but the dozens of moments too small or embarrassing to headline. The way your stomach tightened when you heard their keys in the door. The way you started to dread Sunday nights. The way a joke that used to make you laugh now made you feel tired. Diane Vaughn called it uncoupling back in 1986, and she was right. Most endings are not a single event, but a slow drift, a series of tiny ruptures that only look like a story in hindsight. Psychologist David Sabara found in 1996 that people's explanations for why their relationships ended changed over time. At first, the story is simple, almost surgical. Later, it gets messier, more ambiguous, as the mind tries to make sense of all the fragments. But the first version is the one that gets repeated, the one that gets told to friends, the one that makes it into your own private mythology. It is an obituary for a relationship written before the full autopsy. And what gets left out? Shame, for one. Eli Finkel at Northwestern showed in 2017 that people tend to omit the parts that feel too bodily, too repetitive, too much like a failure of character. The resentment that built up over 100 small slights. The timing that was never quite right. The way you started to flinch at their touch, or the way you found yourself hoping they would cancel plans. Attachment, timing, resentment, bodily aversion. These are the real architects of most endings, but they rarely make it into the official record. Instead, the story privileges one defensible cause. We grew apart. He was afraid of commitment. I needed to find myself. These are not lies, exactly. They are the kind of explanations that preserve dignity, that let you walk away with your head up. But they are also filters, sifting out the parts that do not fit the image you want to keep. The mind is not trying to deceive. It is trying to survive the loss with some self-respect intact. Think about the last time you told someone why it ended. Did you mention the way your body started to tense up when you heard their voice? Did you talk about the nights you lay awake rehearsing what you would say if you ever got the courage to leave? Or did you reach for the cleanest, most defensible reason, the one that would not make you sound petty or weak or ashamed? The truth is, most breakup stories are built backward. The explanation forms after the ending, not before. It is a way of stitching together the chaos, of making the loss feel like it had a reason, a shape, a lesson. But the cost of that story is all the complexity it has to leave out. The sadness is not just in the ending, but in how much of yourself you have to edit away to make the ending make sense. And if love can be rewritten after the fact, then so can the largest story many people tell about themselves, that their life was always heading toward the work they do now. Why you chose this career. You know the story you tell at dinner, the one about why you do what you do. It always starts with a moment. A teacher who saw something in you, a childhood obsession, a crisis that revealed your calling. You can recite it in a job interview without blinking. It is clean, it is noble, and it is almost never the whole story. But let the mess back in for a second. The job you took because it was the only one in the city you could afford. The mentor who noticed you when you were about to quit. The rejection letter that stung so badly you changed direction. The family script that hummed in the background, shaping your sense of what was possible. The skill you happened to be good at, and the one you loved but never got paid for. The friend of a friend who mentioned an opening at the right moment. Mark Granovetter called it the strength of weak ties in 1973. Most people find jobs through acquaintances, not close friends. The path is less a ladder and more a footpath across grass, worn by 1,000 small choices and accidents that only look intentional after enough people have walked it. You are not alone in this. In 2018, LinkedIn found that 85% of jobs are filled through networking, not formal applications. The city you landed in, the year you graduated, the person who vouched for you. These are not side notes. They are the architecture. Robert Frank, an economist, wrote that his own career was shaped by a single mentor's encouragement and a chance encounter, not by a grand plan. Herminia Ibarra found in 2015 that people often grow into their professional identities through action and feedback, not by following a pre-existing script. The story comes later, after the path is already worn. But the story does come. Dan McAdams, a psychologist, wrote in 2012 that people edit their life stories to create coherence and purpose, smoothing over contradictions and accidents. The origin story is not a lie. It is a kind of home renovation. You keep the walls that make sense, paint over the cracks, and forget the rooms you never use. By the time you tell it, the story feels inevitable. It feels like destiny. It feels like you. Think about the last time you explained your work to someone new. Did you mention the job you took because you needed health insurance? The year you almost left your field because nothing was working? The way recognition and reward trained your desire, nudging you toward the path that paid off sooner, even if it was not the one you loved most? Probably not. The story is optimized for coherence and social legibility. It is a press release, not a diary. But here is the strange mercy in all of this. Meaning can arrive after the fact. A career can become the thing you love, not because you chose it with perfect foresight, but because you kept walking, and the path deepened under your feet. The grass wore down, the route became familiar, and the story grew up around it like ivy. The meaning is real, even if the map was drawn backward. So keep your story. Let it be warm. Let it be useful. But loosen your grip on the myth of total authorship. The path was never as straight as it sounds at dinner, which leaves one final possibility that is more unsettling than cynicism. Maybe the stories are false in one sense and still doing something essential in another. The story may be wrong and still necessary. You can feel the urge, right now, to end this story with a clean debunking. No self, no meaning, just machinery. The temptation is real. It would be a relief to say the stories you tell about yourself are just errors, that the voice in your head is a malfunction, and that the only honest move is to throw it all out. But that is not how the mind works, and you would not want it to, because the stories you tell, even the ones that are wrong, do something you cannot live without. They coordinate your memory. They let you wake up in the same body and believe it is still you. They give you a way to explain yourself to other people, to join a group, to plan for a future that does not exist yet. Jerome Bruner called narrative the primary mode of organizing human experience. Dan McAdams spent decades showing that people build life stories to create unity and purpose, even when the stories are stitched together from fragments and guesses. You do not keep these stories because they are true. You keep them because they are useful. They are the map you use to get home, even when the streets are drawn wrong. The map is not the territory, but try living without one. Try waking up every morning with no story about who you are, what you want, or why you are here. The self depends on continuity, even when continuity is partly constructed. And that is the double edge. Meaning-making is adaptive. Jonathan Haidt wrote that it helps people coordinate, persist, and survive, even when the story is not strictly true. Elizabeth Loftus showed that a false memory, once accepted, can be woven into your self-narrative and defended as real. In 2018, researchers at Princeton found that people who were given inaccurate but coherent stories about their own decisions remembered those stories as true, even when shown evidence to the contrary. The story is not just a witness. It is a builder, a fixer, a publicist, a lawyer, a friend. But a useful fiction is still a fiction. The danger is not that your story is false. The danger is that it works so well you forget to check if it is evidence. The same narrative that orients you can mislead you. The same story that gives you dignity can keep you from seeing what actually moved you. Michael Gazzaniga called the left hemisphere an interpreter, always ready to stitch a thread through chaos, to make the world feel whole even when the thread is invented. So you sit with the double truth. The story may be wrong and still necessary. Useful is not the same as true. So if the storyteller is not a witness and not entirely a liar, what exactly should we do with the voice that remains? What if self-knowledge starts with distrust? You are waiting for the voice in your head to say something final. That is the habit. You want the last word, the clean summary, the sentence that makes the rest of your life make sense. But what if the most honest thing you could do right now is to let the story trail off unfinished? Maturity, for most of your life, was sold as clarity. The wise person, the self-aware person, is the one who listens inward and hears a voice that is steady, confident, and true. But what if that is backwards? What if the real mark of growing up is not trusting the voice more, but learning when to hold it at arm's length. Not because it is always wrong, but because it is always there, always narrating, always smoothing the jagged edges of your life into something you can carry. Think of it like listening to the weather report. You do not walk outside in the morning and trust the forecast without looking out the window. You check the sky. You feel the air. You notice the wind. The report is useful, but it is not the world. Your inner story is the same. It is a running commentary, a best guess, a summary of what just happened and what you hope will happen next. Sometimes it is right. Sometimes it is wildly off. The mistake is not having the story. The mistake is forgetting to check the sky. Richard Nisbett and Timothy Wilson showed in 1977 that people can be completely wrong about why they did something and still sound perfectly reasonable. Elizabeth Loftus spent the 1990s planting false memories in people's minds, then watched as they defended those memories with real emotion. Michael Gazzaniga's split-brain patients explained actions their own speaking brain had not caused, because silence was more threatening than being wrong. The lesson is not that you are broken. The lesson is that the narrator is built to narrate, not to know. So what do you do with that? You start by treating your explanations as hypotheses, not as confessions, not as verdicts, but as working drafts. You watch what you do, not just what you say about what you do. You let other people's observations in, even when they sting. You notice the conditions, not just the essence. You ask, under what circumstances do I act this way? Instead of, why am I like this? You let uncertainty remain where certainty used to rush in. Uncertainty is not failure. It is the first honest state. It is the moment you stop demanding that your story be the final authority and start letting it be one voice among many. The narrator can be respected without being obeyed. You can listen to it, thank it, and then check the sky for yourself. So here is the practice, not the slogan. Hold the story lightly. Watch your behavior closely. Ask about conditions, not just character. Let uncertainty have a seat at the table. And when the voice in your head tries to close the file, let it. But do not believe for a second that the file is finished. There is no final word, only the quiet, ongoing work of living with the question.